All right, welcome to GitKon 2022. My name is Jonathan Silva, and I'll be your MC for these 3 days. GitKon 2022 is a free virtual conference about team collaboration, DevOps, security, and much more. We have speakers from companies like GitHub, GitLab, Microsoft, VS Code, Atlassian, and Amazon joining us for 3 days worth of content spanning 36 sessions and 39 speakers in total. Now, before I get into the day one plan, we do have a few housekeeping items to go over. So the first is that GitKon will be streamed on gitcon.com/watch-live. And you may be on there right now. And if you are, glad to have you. And if you're not, you're welcome to join us because below the video player, we have an invitation to join our Discord server. So all of the session Q&A will be handled through our Discord server, where you have the opportunity to ask questions during and after each of the sessions we have during this conference. If you are watching this in the future, please note that the Discord server will only be available for the duration of the conference. So it is definitely a big benefit if you're joining us during these 3 days to participate and ask the questions that you might have from any of our session speakers. Next, we will be on Twitter, and we invite you to share your thoughts about any of the sessions you have or just how things are going using the hashtag GitKon. So again, feel free to @GitKraken, hashtag GitKon, and let us know what you think. We'll tweet right back at you. Okay, so that brings us to day one. So day one includes 12 sessions. So we have 12 sessions lined up for you. And before we get into our keynote speaker, we first have a quick word from our sponsor. Welcome back. It's now time to kick off our first session. So Dries Buytaert will headline GitKon 2022 as our keynote speaker. As the founder of both Drupal and Acquia, Dries has been working with open source projects for over 20 years. Dries has published over 1,500 blog articles over the past several years and enjoys sharing his expertise at events around the world. Let's learn how Dries was able to scale Drupal and Acquia by embracing open source, and why popular features like Drupal themes and a focus on security helped propel them to success.
Hello everybody at GitKon. My name is Dries Buytaert, and I'm the founder and project lead of Drupal. I actually started Drupal 21 years ago, a long time ago. And today I'm still the project lead, and I did Drupal as a hobby project for 7 years. After 7 years I started a company called Acquia. I'm the chief technology officer at Acquia, and Acquia is about 1,500 employees today. So in the last 15 years, both Drupal and Acquia, my company, have grown quite a bit. But let's get into it. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself, how Drupal came to be, how Drupal grew, and then also I'll talk just a little bit about Acquia along the way as well. So first of all, for those of you that don't know Drupal, Drupal is an open source web content management system. It basically means it's software that you can build websites with. And today it's a lot more than just websites. Could be any kind of web application. Drupal is even known to power the entertainment system in airplanes, for example. So anything with a screen that you want to deliver content to, Drupal can be used for that. And literally dozens and dozens of different kinds of applications. Drupal is a very dominant player in the market. 2 to 3% of all the websites in the world run on Drupal, which is obviously quite a bit. But then we also have a very active community of contributors. Every year, over 10,000 people contribute to Drupal to help make Drupal better, and over 1,100 or so different organizations also contribute to Drupal, which is pretty cool. And then we have some other crazy stats, some which I can't quite understand, to be honest. One of them is actually that our website, Drupal.org, we also say D.O, I may use that term, but Drupal.org for some reason gets 1.2 million unique visitors each month. And to me that's just kind of mind-boggling, because it's not that interesting of a website. I mean, it's a website about Drupal, a web content management system. It's not a news website or something, what people or more people would be interested in. But anyway, as I mentioned, I started Drupal. This is actually a photo of me, over 20 years ago, and I'm sitting in my dorm room in Antwerp, Belgium, where I started the Drupal project. And you can see that I was and am, honestly, your typical geek. I have a stamp collection, a chessboard, compiler books, all that kind of stuff. And at the time, I just started Drupal because I wanted to share some messages with friends, other people at my dorm. This was obviously in the early days of the internet and the relatively early days of the web. And I had a need, an itch to scratch, as we say in open source, which was to share messages, but I also wanted to learn about PHP and MySQL. And at the time, believe it or not, 21 years ago, these were kind of the new kids on the block. Up until that point, people had built websites, sometimes in C or Perl and these kinds of languages. And PHP was a breakthrough at the time, and MySQL was also a breakthrough because a lot of us used to store data just in text files on our web server. So having a database and having PHP was kind of interesting, and I figured I would spend a couple of nights building this platform. I would spend a couple nights learning about PHP, MySQL, and also then, end up with something that was useful. And I did that, and I actually kept working on it for the next, now 21 years. But when I finished school, I finished my university, I decided to move the intranet, the message board that I built, to the public internet, and there's a whole story about that as well, on how it came to be named Drupal and Drupal.org, and etc., etc. But eventually, I moved my application that I built for fun from my intranet to the public internet, and it was born as Drupal in 2001. We actually share the same birthday, not only the date or the day and the month, but also the year with Wikipedia. A little side fact. And I kept working on my project. I kept working on Drupal, and I started to attract an audience of people interested in the future of the web. And eventually something pretty cool happened. In 2003, so a few years into the development of Drupal, Howard Dean, which at the time was a presidential candidate in the United States. He was, I would say, an underdog. He really had only very limited chance of winning. But he did something very cool. Like, he was the first presidential candidate in the history to really leverage the internet to campaign. And so he built this platform which was called Dean Space, which was all about organizing his supporters, a grassroots community of supporters, to help campaign for him. And he built this platform on top of Drupal, which was kind of cool. And the impact of that for Drupal is that oftentimes we got a small reference or mention in sort of in the media. Could be Time Magazine or Wall Street Journal, you name it. It would talk about how Howard Dean, this underdog, managed to get surprisingly far, all leveraging this new technology, if you will, the web. And obviously these papers, these news articles, they would talk about Dean Space, and often they would do Dean Space, comma, built on the open source Drupal. And that actually led to more people being aware of Drupal and people getting involved. As a quick side note, Dean Space eventually was spun out as a little startup, and they kept building on Dean Space, and eventually it became a small little company, but actually helped promote Firefox too at some point, because they figured we have this campaign platform that we built on Drupal, there isn't another election for 4 years, so what else can we promote? And they decided to promote Firefox very shortly after Firefox was released. And so anyway, Drupal had a role to play in the promotion of Firefox and driving the adoption of Firefox. But anyhow, by 2005, I was now a few, 5 years into Drupal almost. We had the idea of organizing the very first Drupal conference, and we organized it in Antwerp, where I was from, and about 30 people showed up. And I could not believe 30 people showed up. I could literally not believe it, because the first 4 years, 5 years of Drupal, I just worked on Drupal at night, on the weekend. It's not exactly something I would talk to my friends about. It was just something that I did. And so I couldn't believe that 30 people wanted to travel to Belgium to talk about Drupal every day for 1 week, which was kind of crazy to me. But it was an amazing event, and we decided to keep organizing these conferences. And then by 2005, later in the year, Drupal became more and more well known. It actually led to kind of a dramatic event, if you will. Up until that time, I had used a shared account on a server. I had a friend, Kjartan. He had a little web business. He had a number of customers running all on one server, and he gave me a shell account, or an account in that server, and it's on that account that I ran the Drupal website. And so by 2005, so many people came to Drupal.org, between quotes, that literally that server could not handle the load. And at some point it literally kind of melted, it crashed, and we couldn't get it back up. And I was a student, I didn't know what to do, and what I ended up doing is I replaced sort of all the pages on Drupal.org with an empty page, and in the middle of the page I added a PayPal button. And below the PayPal button was a little bit of text, maybe a few sentences, and it said something like, servers are down, we need about $4,000 to buy a new server, and then we'll be back. Please, donate. And $4,000 was a lot of money. And we figured, let's get a really beefy server so we can grow with it. And then something amazing happened. Within 24 hours, people had contributed $10,000. And it really freaked me out, because I'd never had $10,000 in my life. And so I changed the password, my PayPal password, to be like, this long. And of course, PayPal blocked my account because they said, there was suspicious traffic. And that wasn't surprising, because the first 4 or 5 years of Drupal had maybe collected $50 total over all these years. So here I am within 24 hours, $10,000. And then something else happened. One of the CTOs of Sun Microsystems, which has since been acquired by Oracle, but obviously famous technology company, 20 years ago, he said, he emailed me and he said, hey, we have been using Drupal, which, by the way, I could hardly believe, but we can also ship you a server. They were known for building these, enterprise class servers, and so they actually ended up shipping a $7,000 server, and it sort of showed up at the doorsteps the next door. And then something else happened. The OSL, the open source lab at the university, Portland University in Oregon, they actually said, hey, we have this labs, we have students, computer science students as part of their education. They work in the lab, and if you send us a server, we can run your website. We'll give you free hosting or bandwidth, free electricity, and free labor, basically. Like, we have these students that can help maintain it. And so pretty incredible, right? Like, within 24 hours we had $10,000, a $7,000 server, and magically free hosting, free bandwidth, and people to help maintain these servers. And I wanted to tell that story in quite a bit of detail, because I think it really showed how much people cared, and it showed that we're building something pretty amazing with Drupal. And so we made this poster, which is basically the DrupalCon logo, and on the poster we put all of the names of the people that contributed money, and we would take it with us when we had Drupal events or a conference, and we would put it on the wall as a thank you. And you can see that poster here on the screen. Meanwhile, Drupal kept growing. By 2006, we have all these organizations switching to Drupal. I remember MTV switching to Drupal. I remember MTV.com crashing because they switched to Drupal. And so I spent my nights and evenings helping them. And I did that free of charge. I would jump on a phone call, because this was before Zoom, etc. We would try and debug their problems. And I felt really, I felt that was really important. You know, these big organizations, these famous brands switching to Drupal, I felt like I had to make them successful. You know, this actually led to me creating, you know, Acquia. At the time, I was doing a PhD at the University of Ghent in Belgium, and so I started having this idea of, for Drupal to be successful, it needed a company like Acquia. You know, basically a Red Hat for Linux, you know, like an Acquia for Drupal, kind of the same idea. We provide commercial support, so we launched in 2007. Ended up raising quite a bit of money for Acquia over the years in many different rounds, but ended up raising $180 million, and actually sometimes over Skype. And this was before COVID, long before COVID, when raising money over Skype or Zoom was really unheard of. And then by 2009, something else happened. At the time, Drupal was used by, you know, government websites. There was a website, I think it was called recovery.gov, and basically there was a financial crisis of 2008, 2009. President Obama had created an $800 billion stimulus bill, which was crazy large at the time. Again, everything changed with COVID, of course, but the site was pretty cool because they tracked every dollar spent. And so you could go to this site, recovery.gov, and you could see, here's a $10 million project, here's a person in charge, it's delivered on time, on budget, it's accepted by the stakeholders, and every dollar you could kind of see, like, you know, President Obama brought this, you know, very transparent approach to running the government. And so get this email from the White House, they invite me to the White House. I'm like, oof, kind of nervous, have to do background checks, all that kind of stuff. And I expected them to talk about recovery.gov because it was a big deal, it was in the news. But a few minutes into the conversation, they start talking about whitehouse.gov and asking me questions like, hey, could Drupal run whitehouse.gov? And this was the first time that you know, the White House used open source, and I said yes. I was very nervous afterwards, but I said yes to it, and they eventually ended up launching on Drupal sort of 6 to 9 months later, you know, pretty fast. And it's been a great success. You know, throughout the Obama administration, there was 0 issues in terms of scale or security, and it was an incredible testament to Drupal, right? Because it's probably one of the sites with the most hack attempts. It gets, you know, tens of millions of visitors during a State of the Union, these kinds of things. And then Obama administration also really started innovating in a pretty cool way. Like they built something like We the People. Every American citizen got an account on whitehouse.gov if they wanted, and they could file petitions, they could vote for petitions, and the Obama administration promised that if they reach a certain number of, you know, votes or, you know, signatures, if you will, his administration would look into it and you know, do something about it. And it actually had a huge success. Like, for example, in the US, cell phones were always bundled with a plan. Like, you couldn't just buy a cell phone. That was one of the petitions. Immediately got a whole bunch of signatures, and they unbundled that. They said you have to unbundle cell phones from plans. Like, you have to make an optional available like that. And so that was pretty cool. I made a lot of different changes. But of course, the internet wouldn't be the internet, or somebody submitted a pretty funny petition, which was basically to build the Death Star. And it got like a bazillion votes. And of course, the promise that Obama made is that he would respond to everything with more than votes. And actually they did respond, and they said the construction of the Death Star has been estimated to cost more than $850 trillion, I think. We're working hard to reduce the deficit, not to expand it. Also, the administration does not support blowing up planets. And lastly, and this is my favorite, why would we even build it if it can be destroyed by a one-man starship. So that was pretty fun anecdote. But anyway, huge testament to Drupal. Drupal kept growing, Acquia kept growing. I eventually ended up moving to Boston as well. DrupalCons kept growing. You know, by 2011, we had 3,200 people attend DrupalCon in Chicago. And I remember because we held it in this building. It's called the Drupal Tower. And we went to the Chicago Sheraton and we said, can we take over the whole building? And I forgot what they said, but they said, sure, but it's going to be like, 1.5 million or something. And we said, we'll take it. And so we took over the Sheraton building. We called it the Drupal Tower. It was pretty special. I remember when you checked into the conference, you got a little bag, and in the bag we had put Drupal pajamas for everyone. And so you could literally walk into the lobby of the hotel at 5 a.m. in the morning, and you would find dozens and dozens of people working on Drupal in their pajamas. And so I think it's a sign for sort of the passionate and global community that the Drupal project has. By 2016, lots and lots of organizations adopted Drupal, from NBC Sports to the NASDAQ. You can actually see the CIO of NASDAQ give a presentation, and as part of the presentation, we took over the billboard on Times Square in New York. So they put up the Drupal logo on the billboard live during his presentation, which was kind of cool. We work with many large organizations from Nestle, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer. They have thousands of sites with Drupal. And today in the enterprise segment, I think it's about 1 out of 8 websites run on Drupal. And so that's a little bit the story of Drupal. I wanted to leave you with 3 quick lessons. There's a lot of things I could share, a lot of lessons learned, but I wanted to give you a few lessons as it relates to open source, because I imagine a lot of you are open source developers and open source contributors, right? The first lesson for me is there aren't usually overnight success. Sometimes people will say like, wow, I mean, how did Drupal get so big so quick? And reality is it took a long time. And I've developed this belief that everything worth doing, everything that is going to be noticed, every brand that's going to be recognized, it takes at least 10 years. And it took Drupal 10 years to become somewhat well known. It took Acquia 10 years to be somewhat well known. I think it's very typical. So I think it's important to put things in perspective. I see a lot of people that want to be successful within 6 months, a year, 2 years, and sometimes that happens, but often it takes a long time. So be persistent, keep building, and patiently keep focusing on building high quality software, good software that people will use, and you'll get there. The second lesson I wanted to share is that entrepreneurship and even open source is 80% sales and marketing. And I'm saying that in front of a developer audience. I know it's slightly controversial. It's on purpose. I'm an engineer by education, but a lot of what made Drupal and Acquia successful is being able to sell. And I don't necessarily mean selling in the traditional way, trying to sell a product, but in order for your project or your company be too successful, you have to sell your product to customers, obviously, but you also have to sell your vision to investors if you're planning to raise money. You have to sell your vision to potential hires. You have to convince them to join your company. You have to sell the vision to your community, your open source community, to convince them to go in a certain direction. You constantly have to do that, even after people join your company or people decided to join your open source project. You have to keep selling them their vision and next steps. And so, as an engineer myself, I never really learned that in school, so to speak, and I had to learn that the hard way. And so I would encourage you, if you have opportunities as an engineer, to get exposed to sales and marketing and really to embrace it instead of having sort of an adverse reaction to it, which I often see. It doesn't mean you have to be a salesperson, but it means you have to learn how to tell a story, get people excited, be clear in your communication, be exciting too in your communication. So I'm not saying I'm the best at it, not at all, but I will tell you I had to learn this over the years, and I feel like it's been pretty important. The last thing I want to say, and then I'll wrap up, is that you know, success comes from working with great people. Like, Drupal isn't the result of me. You know, Drupal is the result of thousands of people, you know, tens of thousands of people contributing to the project. So I think success comes from having a good idea. There is no doubt about it. But then you need to combine it with good execution, and you need a great team to execute on that. And you have to combine it with an element of luck as well. And so that's it. That's what I wanted to share today. Hit me up. I have a website, Dries, DRI.es. You can email me at dries@buytaert.net. And yeah, happy to talk more. And by the way, Drupal is so old that we started with CVS, for those that remember that. We migrated to Subversion. I forgot when that was. Must have been 2007 or something. And obviously now for the last, I don't even know how long, decade plus, we have been using Git, of course. So if you want to get involved, you've got the skills. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.
Thank you, Dries, for that generous keynote. Now, if you, the viewer, have questions for Dries and you're watching live, well, now's your chance to post your questions in our Discord server. So again, the link to join the Discord server is below the video player. And once you join, you may post your questions, and this goes for any of the sessions today and throughout the rest of the conference. So during the session, you may post questions as you're listening to the speaker, and our speakers will be available to answer those questions. And then if you're watching this later on, or if you want to post your questions just due to time zone, still post those questions about that session, and our speaker should be able to still continue the conversation throughout the rest of the conference. Okay, next I have a short little teaser for you coming up next. All right, coming soon is coming right now. So we're pleased to announce our Kraken art giveaway. And this is happening all throughout the GitKon 2022 conference. So you may have already noticed there are 3 locked images on our Watch Live page. And for a limited time each day, one of those images will be unlocked, giving you the opportunity to download it. So once you download the image, you can follow the instructions on our Watch Live page. This is for the Kraken art giveaway. And this is your chance to win a hoodie featuring one of the 3 custom art designs and win a $100 Amazon gift card. Not too bad, right? So to enter the contest, download the unlocked image for the day and then post a selfie on Twitter with a custom image somewhere in the background. Make sure to mention @GitKraken, and then leave the hashtag GitKon, and share something you've liked about the conference so far. At the end of the conference, we will announce 3 lucky winners. So keep your eye out for when each of those images unlocks each day. You could do all 3 and increase the likelihood that you might be one of our 3 lucky winners. Okay, that leaves me with enough time to introduce our next session. So we have 2 people joining our next session. We have Eric and Kerry. Eric Amodio is an entrepreneur, innovator, architect, and full stack engineer. He's the creator of GitLens and the CTO at GitKraken. And he is joined by Kerry O'Shea Gorgone, who is a senior editor and writer at AppFire. Kerry sat down with Eric to ask questions about his journey from developer to entrepreneur to tech exec. And let's listen in.
Hello, I'm Kerry O'Shea Gorgone with AppFire, and I am so excited to be here for GitKon 2022. Today, we're going to talk with Eric Amodio. You may have heard of him. He's an entrepreneur, innovator, architect, and full stack engineer, the creator of GitLens and CTO of GitKraken, and previously held engineering leadership roles on the VS Code team at Microsoft and CodeStream. Eric, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So when you were a kid, did you fantasize about being a CTO someday? Like when you played with your action figures? How did this happen?
No. I mean, I think, when I was a kid, hardware was my go-to. So like, having electronic Legos, I loved Legos. And so computers were like, electronic Legos that you can sort of tear apart and put together. So I loved doing that. And, the software side kind of came just from tinkering, but I never really loved that too much compared to the hardware of actually building it. But as tools got more advanced, there, I saw Visual Basic, and Visual Basic was sort of like the game changer for me. It was like, moving from this environment where I couldn't really imagine what I wanted and make things happen to where now I can sort of like, build out the things in my head and really just like create things. And so that just really made me get hooked and really switched the thing from hardware to software.
When was your first exposure? Like when did you realize coding was a thing?
From a young age, my dad was a programmer working on PCs. So, I would sit even as like, as young as 5, sitting with him, watching what was doing. And, at the time too, he was working on a, sort of like text-based terminal on a PC. And we also had one of the new Macs, the original Macintosh. And I liked playing with that because it had, icons and things you could see and click on. Whereas like, this archaic computer of just, text. And it's funny, now I write most stuff in text and it's come full circle. But yeah, I mean, that's when I sort of really started liking that and then playing with, just seeing how things work. I love taking stuff apart. So it's like, just seeing how my computer worked and, seeing what I can make the internals do.
So what about open source? When did you make that leap?
Far, far later. I just love the whole idea of open source. I mean, it's just, computing, even, when I was younger, it was like, everything was just open. There, there wasn't things that were closed nearly as much.
They didn't know how yet.
Yeah. And it was like, everything was sort of shared and you're like built on this idea of standing on the shoulder of giants. And, we've been really moving away from that where I'm like, I just love the open source movement. It's like kind of bringing that back and really moving us all forward rather than, lots of little silos of stuff.
When did you realize it was a career? Like you could actually make a career out of this?
In college is where I switched from wanting to, create CPUs. That was my passion. Like I really liked the hardware side. But, I basically created some little apps that became really popular of just, freeware, shareware type things. The code wasn't open because there was no place to really like open code at that point in time. But, that's where I got bit by the bug of like really wanting to create software and create things and tools that people liked. And so, yeah, I switched and, started looking at careers in doing, software to where I can create things. When I first had grown up, it was like tools and stuff were really at the forefront, and then that sort of faded. And then really where it brought me back was when VS Code came out. I really just, sort of fell in love with the tool. It sort of reinvigorated to me, sort of that ethos of, building tools and really having extensible things that everyone can hack upon, then it becoming open source. That's what really drove me back to really, into the Microsoft ecosystem again and wanting to work on that team. So it was really that team that drew me back or drew me in.
So then GitLens, was that something you felt like you needed personally, and it just turned out a whole bunch of other people, like 17 million other developers also needed it? Or
yeah, it's been a crazy road. Yeah, I mean, it started out, it started out kind of twofold. One, I wanted to play with, VS Code just launched their extensibility model, and I loved VS Code. TypeScript was just coming out, and I wanted to play more with TypeScript. So it was like, okay, well, I can do both. So let me just create something. I saw some features that Visual Studio had, these code lens where you can tell about like the author about Git. So it's like, oh, maybe I can do the same thing in VS Code. So I did that. And it's like, okay, this is kind of cool. So put that out. And then it was more about, keep building on the tool that, I wanted to use, wanted stuff out of VS Code to help me do the things that I did on a day-to-day basis, and also to help my team understand Git better, and just, use it more effectively. And so it really just, sort of snowballed from there. Just, having passion for building tools and having passion for like the things that I wanted to get done and make my life easier, and just kept building them in. And, over time it turned into a beast.
Well, at what point, like I've heard musicians say the first time they heard their song played on the radio or in a grocery store or something, it's like the moment they felt like, oh, this is a thing. When did you feel like, oh, GitLens is a thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, a few times where it's been like, I've heard it on, on Twitter is memes, where it's like, like GitLens calling you out because, sort of like the Git blame thing is like, most of the time when you're looking at who did this, it's you, prior you. So like, it's, hearing GitLens called me out and stuff like this, and a lot of memes were like, whoa, okay, this has sort of changed how I thought about that. But I think from the other side was also just seeing GitLens in, a few different Microsoft keynotes were quite incredible. So that was a marked difference.
A rare self-burn. You made it possible. So what do you think was the feature set or approach that led to it being so popular? Like what was the secret sauce?
I think it's a few different things. I mean, I think, being early in the space just helps, right? Your first mover type advantage. But I think one of the big things is really about, you can install GitLens and you get passive value. You don't have to do anything. So right then and there, you install it, and then it's going to show you information that helps you look and understand the code that you're seeing. So I think that's a big point. And then you can sort of ease into using more and more of the product. And then the other thing too is a movement in developer space and even in VS Code is like, having these really small tools that do one thing, and you have to combine all these tools together to create a cohesive experience. I really went the other way with GitLens on like, doing more of kitchen sink, but making sure that it was, more pay for play, so that like, you weren't penalized performance wise if you didn't use these features. These features would only, have a cost if you, were to take advantage of them, enable them, just because of discovery and just usability into coming into these things, like getting installed is another barrier.
So what's next for GitLens?
Still want to build it out, as, just, really tackle the Git parts, right? Just make Git more accessible. I mean, that's, sort of its tagline is, Git supercharged. And, so it's like basically making the power of Git more accessible to everyone. GitLens really doesn't sort of, I mean, I don't think it sort of fully delivers on that for the novice, right? So, it helps. I mean, it's way more accessible than Git is by itself, but there's a lot more that we can do to help and educate that to make these things easier. I mean, it does more about like providing you more power there, but we also want to provide some more simplicity. But then we'll also be adding on with just tackling more of the developer productivity space. Is, like really just trying to, help you understand the code better, and then, develop that code more effectively and easier. So
no pressure, but like, what do you think is going to happen with dev tools in general in the next like year or so?
I mean, I think, with dev tools, I think we'll start seeing a shift from, a lot of local tools to more cloud-based things. I mean, I think things like, VS Code Dev and GitHub Dev are sort of like, sort of showing where stuff can go, and there's, Stack Blitz and others that are, are showing what you can do in the browser from anywhere. I think those things are really interesting. And then you have the full cloud environments like Codespaces and Gitpod, which I think you're going to start seeing more and more of as we do that. So I think that shift will continue. I'm not saying it will replace local. I think it will eat a significant portion of it, but there will always be the time for that local development as well. But I think just getting in, I think it will be a big boom for open source because, you don't have to go and set anything up with, like dev containers or these other things. This stuff can be just spun up completely for you, ready to go, make your change. You don't need to worry about your environment and contribute back. I think that will sort of, lower the barrier for getting people into trying new things, into stacks that they may not be used to or setups that they're not familiar with, to make that really much more accessible.
So the other buckle up.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other big piece for dev tools is going to be AI. Seeing tools like Tab9 and GitHub Copilot are just, scratching the surface on what we'll be seeing. It's a real double-edged sword. I think, AI brings some really awesome power, but it also brings some significant challenges and, just like how it's used, and just, like any tool, like it could be really dangerous depending on how it's used. So, but I think we will see that expand dramatically over the next, year or two.
If you could offer some advice for developers, what advice would you offer a developer who wants to become an entrepreneur? What do they need to know?
For me, it was about just following my passions. Like, I like problem solving and being able code for me is like this creative expression. So it's like, I can have these ideas and then create them and put them out there. And I always just love creating things that other people, creating things for me, but that other people would find value in, that sort of thing. So, I mean, a lot of the apps and tools and stuff that I've built over the years have all been sort of like, scratching my own itch on something that I really wanted, and then, adopting and learning from how others use it and that sort of stuff. I think, so like, if you're sort of authentic to what you're trying to create and you're passionate about that, then you can go from there. The other side is, try a lot of things, because it's like, your one thing is not gonna likely take off. If you're just trying one, there's, I've built many different tools in many different spaces, and, GitLens miraculously took off. I got very lucky. But, there's, so many other tools that didn't necessarily hit that adoption, but they still have value for their communities and that sort of stuff.
Your B-side tools.
Yeah, exactly.
What about open source in particular? So what would you say to a developer who wants to start their own open source project?
Do it. And, I would say, like, don't shy away from it too. I mean, like when I started, open source wasn't a thing, so they stayed closed. But then, when I moved into sort of VS Code and other space, like, I just put stuff out there. I was worried too, is like, what people are going to think with this, code I'm just throwing out there. Is it good? Is it bad? Am I going to get judged on it? It's like a worry you worry about, but it's not a thing that actually happens after. Like, once you do it, like nobody, you don't have that issue. So, I mean, I think it's just like putting stuff out there, trying it. Don't expect like you're going to throw some code up there and everyone's going to come running to help and that sort of stuff. But, you can build community either organically or just try to encourage the community, by helping lay out what things you want help on and that sort of stuff. But I would definitely recommend doing it. I love open source.
I was just thinking, if I put some code out there, people would definitely come running to help me. They'd be like, "Oh, honey, get a different job." Maybe just interview people. Stick with that. Eric, Amodio, thank you so much. Stick around because there is so much more to come for GitKon 2022.
All right, if you have questions for Eric and Kerry, then this is a reminder to join us in our Discord server. So this is where we're having Q&A for all of our sessions, and this is your chance to post a question for the panel. So if you want to ask them questions, our speakers will be there during their session, and you can still post questions thereafter, and they'll be happy to answer your questions and continue the conversation. A friendly reminder as well that you can join our Kraken art giveaway, so you can participate for the opportunity to win a hoodie with one of our custom art designs, and then you can also win a $100 Amazon gift card. Our next speaker is Derrick Stolee from GitHub. The inner workings of Git's object database can be a mystery to most users. I know it is for me. Let's learn about Git database internals so you can advance your use of Git to the next level.
Hello, my fellow Git nerds. I'm Derrick Stolee, an engineer at GitHub and a Git contributor. Today, my goal is to popularize an idea. Git is the distributed database at the core of your engineering system. When you think about it, Git is the center of your collaboration infrastructure. Not only does Git allow multiple developers to do concurrent work on the same repository, but it also links with your build and test infrastructure, determines which versions you deploy to production or release to customers, and stakeholders in your organization may watch your repository to measure activity and progress. All of these activities coordinate using Git as a communication medium. As a parallel, your application database is the core of your application infrastructure. To persist application data, almost all applications use a third-party database application. This database stores the information that is manipulated and served by application services. Background jobs process data async from user requests. Your infrastructure may have built custom backup procedures with failover remediation. Let's also keep in mind that the database health is monitored by support and SRE. This leads to engineers learning a lot about how application databases work. There are thousands of books about how databases work and how you can write applications that take advantage of their strengths. No one bats an eye at the work required to understand your database and interact with it properly. Huge investments are made to build extra infrastructure around the database to make sure it remains healthy as your application grows. And I'm here to say that everyone should learn about Git in the same way. So here's my personal pairing of database concepts to Git concepts at the highest levels. At their core, databases store tables of data. Git stores objects in its object store. We manipulate and access database information using queries. Git's query language is its command line interface. Databases use specialized query indexes to speed up certain queries. Git has advanced data structures specifically for speeding up certain kinds of Git commands. Distributed databases have custom ways of remaining consistent and dealing with concurrent changes across database nodes. Git repositories communicate through fetches and pushes to synchronize after the fact based on user demand. Finally, when databases need to scale beyond the limits of a single node, application developers can use one of many sharding strategies. Git has similar strategies using multi-repo organization. And by this, I want to equip you with a framework and a vocabulary. You can use these parallels when describing advanced Git features to your fellow developers, and hopefully starting from the common understanding of application databases will help bridge the gap to the Git concepts. Today, I'll talk about my favorite parts of these concepts. Let's start at the beginning with Git's object store. The main storage of Git repositories can be considered as two database tables. The object store has two columns, an object ID and object data. For a given row, the object ID is the hash of the object contents column. This makes the object store a form of content addressable storage. It's not too helpful to need the contents of what you're looking for before you find it, so Git has another table providing starting pointers. The reference store table has two columns, a reference name and an object ID. The reference name is the primary key. These human-chosen names are pointers into the opaque object store, allowing us to gain a foothold into the contents. In this example, the refs tags v2.37.0 reference points to an object in the object store. That object is an annotated tag, which points to a commit in the object store. That commit specifies the object ID of its root tree. That tree contains an entry for the readme.md file, whose object ID points to a blob. That blob object stores that file's contents. We've just taken several jumps through the object store just to find the readme for Git 2.37.0. We can review this lookup in a more abstract way as walking the edges of a graph. First, the reference points to a tag object. The tag object has an object pointer pointing to a commit in this case. Commits have pointers to their parents and to their root tree. And tree entries point to other trees or blobs. We follow the entry for readme.md to find the contents for that file. I'll use this representation for the rest of the talk. Specifically, circles are commits, triangles are trees, and boxes are blobs. When seen in aggregate, the Git object graph can look like this. I'll keep the commit history grouped at the top, with a row of root trees below. As we go deeper into subtrees, we find that some tree entries are shared, so despite storing snapshots of work trees at each commit, many of the trees and blobs at two commits are actually shared. This Merkle tree representation is the first way that Git keeps its object store small as users make changes. However, if we're storing full copies of every version of every file, then that would also grow too quickly for most use cases. Here, I've grouped some of the objects that appear at the same path across multiple commits. The top row of root trees all represent the base directory of the work tree. These 3 blobs at the bottom might represent the same source code file. One thing Git can expect is that these objects share significant portions in common, because as software developers, we tend to modify a small portion of the repository at a time. Git uses a particular kind of compression when objects have a lot of common data: delta compression. Here I'm showing an example tree object as the base object, as well as an example delta object. Deltas are instructions to help construct an object based on copying regions from a base object and writing new regions at certain points. We start by copying the initial segment of the tree up until the object ID of the Git version gen entry. Then we write a new section of data corresponding to a different object ID. Finally, we copy the remaining data from the original tree, starting with the file name for the Git version gen entry. At the end of this process, we have constructed the decompressed object, but used significantly less data to store the 2 objects than if we did not use delta compression. This type of compression works quite well for trees, but also works well for most blobs, assuming blobs store plain text files such as source code and documentation. Git has a custom file format that can take advantage of delta compression: pack files. Pack files store multiple objects by concatenating their contents into a single file. The objects are packed together. In addition to full object contents, deltas can also be stored, as long as their bases are also in the pack file. This on-disk storage is not the only way Git uses the pack file format, though. In fact, the format used to store compressed object data on disk is also used to share objects over the network between repositories. Let's explore how repositories synchronize efficiently. The following process outlines the behavior between a Git client and a Git server during a git fetch command. First, the client asks the server for the ref advertisement, which is a list of references and their current object IDs from the server's perspective. The client takes this information and decides which references are important, as well as which object IDs are not present on the local machine. The rest of the communication is done via object ID, in case the remote server changes ref positions. The client then sends a list of object IDs, each of which is marked as a have or a want. The want IDs are objects that are not in the client repository, but are referenced by interesting refs. The have IDs are objects that are in the client repository, and the client guesses are also on the server repository, based on previous records of the server's references. At this point, let's take a look inside what the server is doing. Here's an example object graph, including commits, trees, and blobs. Suppose the client sends one have and one want. It wants the commit A and has the commit B. The server infers that the client has everything reachable from the haves, giving this region of objects. The server then determines which objects are reachable from the wants, but not reachable from the haves. These are the objects the client needs. Back to the server-client interaction, the client may send a small number of haves and wants, but really desires a large set of objects. The result is that the server sends a pack file filled with object data. This pack contains the objects from that object graph walk that are reachable from the wants and not reachable from the haves. This process allowed these 2 repositories to find a set of objects that the client needed without each side listing their full contents. This synchronization is specialized to use the object graph in creative ways. In addition to only providing the newer objects, the pack file sent over the network can also use delta compression. These deltas can use offset deltas that point within the pack file, but also reference deltas that can point to a base object ID that is expected to be present on the client machine based on the list of have objects. This allows even further compression during synchronization. You might be thinking, it's nice that Git has my back and is doing smart things under the hood, but what can I do about this? Well, you are in control of your repository. You determine its shape, and you can influence the norms of your organization. So I have 2 quick tips to share with you today. The first is that you should run git maintenance start in your favorite repositories. This will start fetching from your remotes on an hourly basis, reducing the time spent synchronizing in your foreground git fetch operations. It also repacks your object store incrementally on a nightly basis to keep things running smoothly and reducing the disk space required for your repository. The second is that you should practice good repository hygiene. You want to take advantage of Git's delta compression whenever possible. The good news is that files that do not compress well also do not tend to diff well or merge well, so they do not present as reviewable changes in your pull requests. To fix this, you should remove large binaries from your repositories, especially those that change often. Also, you should avoid committing files that are created by your build process. Only store build inputs in your repository, not outputs. I have a quick overview I want to give to you about macro-scale repository organization. It comes from the concepts of sharding databases when application databases grow larger than what a single node can support. Before talking about sharding strategies, I should first mention that the lack of sharding is the basis of the monorepo pattern. Monorepos are a great idea if you're careful in using good repo hygiene. As your repository grows, it becomes more important to use the advanced Git features that allow focusing on a small subset of the repository, like partial clone and sparse checkout. I've talked a lot about monorepo scale in the past, so let's talk about these sharding strategies. There are different ways to shard your repositories, depending on which works best for your situation. Each of these strategies takes inspiration from database sharding strategies, such as vertical sharding, horizontal sharding, and sharding of time series databases. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go deep into these strategies today. I wrote a 5-part blog series on the GitHub engineering blog that goes super deep on all these concepts. Hopefully this talk inspires you to dive deeper into these ideas or to use them as reference in the future. And if you remember nothing else of what I've said, let me maybe repeat the core concept that you should remember. Git is the distributed database at the core of your engineering system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derrick. If you have questions for Derrick, then hop over to our Discord server where you can post questions as part of our Q&A. You may already be in there asking those questions, but remember you can still post questions all throughout the conference. Okay, this brings us now to an announcement. We're very excited for this announcement. I'm particularly excited for this announcement. So it is our pleasure to announce the launch of the Foundations of Git certification course by GitKraken. So over the years, our team has researched and debated the best way to distill Git concepts into digestible content. We're proud to present this curated course that covers key concepts for getting started with Git or even just filling in the gaps. We've assembled a mix of video and written content that could be taken at your own pace. Concepts are explained with motion graphics and then followed by application examples in the CLI, GitKraken client, or GitLens. Lessons will cover Git commands and concepts like branching, merging and rebasing, forks, pull requests, as well as situational tools like stashing, cherry picking, Git hooks, and so much more. You'll get a chance to practice for yourself through exercises in a sandbox repo. We'll have quizzes sprinkled throughout all of the lessons, and at the very end, we will present the certification exam. For those of you who pass the certification exam, you will be awarded with a Git certificate by GitKraken, which you may share with your team, you may share with your network on LinkedIn, or share with your company and just let folks that you now know the fundamentals. Now, other similar courses typically cost somewhere around the neighborhood of $100 USD. And you could argue that our Foundations of Git course is valued at maybe somewhere around $70. But our course will instead be available to GitKon attendees and everyone else for free. So no additional cost. You can enroll for free and take the course starting right now. So you're invited to either enroll or share this course with others using the site learn.gitkraken.com. So again, the course is available right now just by going to learn.gitkraken.com. You can enroll for yourself, share it with others, or folks that you think might benefit from learning the foundations of Git. With that, it's time to introduce our next speaker. So Nicolas Fränkel is a developer advocate with 15 years plus experience consulting for various customers in multiple industries, including telecom, banking, insurance, retail, and the public sector. Let's learn how to keep your developer CV updated with Git, GitHub, and GitHub Actions.
Hi folks, I'm Nicolas Fränkel. I've worked for 17 years as a developer, an architect, a solutions architect. Then I noticed that I became dissatisfied with how projects are run. Basically, you spend a lot of time like trying to fix organizational problem with technical solutions, and I decided to become a developer advocate. Nowadays, I work on the Apache API 6 project. Apache API 6 is from the Apache Foundation. It's an API gateway that is built on top of Nginx. Then we have OpenResty on top, which is a Lua engine. Then we have a lot of out-of-the-box plugins written in Lua that allows you to configure your routes. I won't talk about it today. Today I want to talk about this problem. Imagine you are a developer, and by developer I mean it's more general. You are a person working in tech. You can be a developer, you can be an architect, you can be a designer. It's not important. And you want to build up your career. You want to make your CV shine, but you don't want to become a manager. My experience has shown me that employers could be divided into two axes, whether they are more local or more global, and whether IT for them is a support function or a core business. I believe that global companies whose core business is IT is the target. At least that's, again, my experience. That's what I aim to do nowadays. And in the following, we are going to see how to target those companies. So you hear a lot about this GitHub profile being your developer CV. And I completely agree that is completely debatable. Some companies will care about it, some don't. But the companies that are global and whose core business is IT are very interested in your GitHub profile. However, there is a chance that your GitHub activities, are pretty empty. So here, of course, is nothing at all. Perhaps you don't have much to show, but, it might be the case. There are a couple of reasons. First, if you are working for a local company, your project might not be public or even might not be open source. Thing is, perhaps you are not on GitHub. Perhaps your company is working on GitLab or they host their own repo and you commit, but your commit are not shown on GitHub. Another reason is you have a social life, meaning that outside of work, you don't want to work on open source projects. That's not the point. This is the case, you don't have much to show. In my case, for example, before I worked on projects and basically I had a lot of contributions in private repository, meaning that my GitHub activity was very nice, but people from the outside, they couldn't see much. However, I'm sure that most of you have a lot to show, even if it's not about GitHub commits. For example, you might be writing blog posts, you might be speaking at conferences, perhaps you are a designer and, you have your own portfolio. Perhaps you do stuff on Instagram. Perhaps you are an avid Stack Overflow contributor. I don't know, but most of you have something to show. So the idea is we want to take all those activities and put them on GitHub. And there is a magic repo. And this repo is your handle/your handle. And basically, if you create a README at the root of this repo, it will show up on your profile. So let's see some example of what people are doing. So at the simplest level, you can just put your resume, but on GitHub. You add a couple of emojis, you add some links, and it's done. It's already something. Or you can have some more let's say interactive presentation saying, hey, I'm this person, this is what I like to do, this is what I'm doing. So different presentation of who you are. Perhaps you want to write something that works on a GitHub page. For example, a music player. Perhaps you want to leverage the pages and have lots of links, and then have your 3D GitHub activities as a map. Or if you are really geeky, perhaps you want to create an interactive chess game. And so this one is very interesting because this is not only an interactive chess game, but you have links, and basically every time you click on the link, it's your next move. So the person will receive the PR. So when you click on the link, it opens the PR. The repo owner will receive the PR, will merge it, and then it will advance the game. If you are lacking inspiration, I encourage you to have the check at this awesome GitHub profile README. You find a lot of different ideas depending on who you are, what you like, how do you want to introduce yourself. I'm sure you will find something that is for you. I'm a developer. I'm not a designer, so my profile is not that interesting. I just want to get data and to put it on my profile. For example, I say, hey, I want to show my 3 latest blog posts, my next conference talks, and my latest YouTube video. For that, I have APIs available. For example, of course, for YouTube, I have the YouTube API, but for some of my talks, I have the GitLab because I store everything in GitLab. And for my blog, I have the RSS, so I will fetch everything. My tech stack is very specific. I wanted to learn about Kotlin scripting, so I use Kotlin because I'm a big Kotlin fan. If I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't use Kotlin. Perhaps I would use Python or something else. But anyway, it was still an interesting learning experience, and it works, so it's fine. So I have this tech stack, and I have the GitHub Actions. And the GitHub Action, it's scheduled daily. So every time I do a change, then it will scrap the latest change daily, and it will do the checkout of the repo, install Kotlin, execute the script, which I'll show you just afterwards, and then commit and push. So this is how it translates. I have this build.yaml. I can trigger it manually. I also have a schedule. And then, as I mentioned, it does the checkout of the repo. I install Kotlin. And then I have this script that I will show you just afterwards. I pass in a couple of secrets because most of the APIs need to be authenticated. Then I commit and I push. The script is the following. It's a Kotlin scripting file. So here I defined a couple of dependencies. And well, I won't go into too much detail, but the important part is this one. So here I create a template. As I mentioned, I'm using the FreeMarker template engine. And so basically I create the template. I get it from the template.adoc. Template.adoc is this one. And here I define a couple of variables. I define some loops. And so what I'm doing is I will get the templates, and then I do all the scraping and the getting of all the data. And at the end, what I'm doing is here I put everything into a map, and then I write from the template the data into the template. So on one side, I have the data. On the other side, I have the template. I merge both, and I write it into the readme.adoc. And then at the end, I've got all my commits here. And you can see, well, I didn't do anything. And here, a long time ago, I did some commit myself because I had some error. But you can see it runs non-endlessly without any manual intervention. And here is the final result. As I mentioned, recent blog posts, upcoming talks, and the latest video recording. Of course, I put some links and whatever, but again, it's up to you to decide whatever you want to do with that. So thanks for your attention. You can follow me on Twitter. I've described in much more detail the steps that I have implemented. If you want to dive in deeper, you can check the blog post I wrote about it. And if you want to check my profile, well, here is the link.
Thank you, Nicolas. All right. I think at this point, you know the drill. If you have questions for Nicolas, please ask them in the Discord. So post your questions in there. Again, you can post your questions during the actual sessions themselves, and you're welcome to continue the conversation throughout the entire course of GitKon. Okay, so we have something fun and light to change things up. So let's head over to our GitKon correspondent, Bill Huxley, with an exclusive interview you'll only get at GitKon.
Hello, I'm Bill Huxley, and this is Between Two Branches, a interview show about software developers, where I ask the questions about software and the other person answers them. And today I have John, who is going to be answering questions about project management. So tell me, when you're planning things out and you're trying to plan the schedule for a release, and the developers tell you how long something's going to take, what is your strategy for undercutting that and compressing too much work into too little time?
I don't know if that's exactly how I would describe like personal management of time, but I do think it's important for developers to be essentially estimating how much time their tickets should take so that I know how long a release cycle should be or how much work we can fit into it.
Do you live in like a negaverse, like a Doctor Strange, like time works different there?
No, but considering all of your tickets are off by about 3 weeks, I have to imagine that you do.
Moving on. So it says here for 3 years that you were a software developer before you became a project manager. Do you ever feel embarrassed that now my activity on GitHub is much higher than yours?
My paycheck is bigger than yours.
So tell me, John, what does project management mean to you?
I think it's really important to help developers, the ones who were, writing the code, with their actual implementation.
Actually, you know what? Why don't you just write me a Jira ticket about it, and we can scrum it in our next sprint iteration stand-up. This has been Between Two Branches. I'm Bill Huxley. You can go now.
Do you guys validate parking?
That wasn't in the iteration plan. So.
Thank you, Bill, for that wonderful interview. So that was our edition of Between Two Branches. We'd love to hear your thoughts, either in the Discord server. The link to join is below the video player. Or feel free to send us a tweet. So if you are tweeting us, don't forget to tag @GitKraken and use the hashtag GitKon. And hey, maybe this is your opportunity to participate in the Kraken art giveaway. So as a recap, on the Watch Live page, we've unlocked one of the 3 custom art designs. And what you can do is download it. And the way that you participate and enter into the contest is tweet us a picture of your setup, or just have the image somewhere in the background of your image. And be sure to tag GitKraken and include the hashtag GitKon, and you will enter into the opportunity to win one custom hoodie with one of the custom art designs, along with a $100 Amazon gift card. Not too bad, right? You can enter every day to increase the likelihood that you might win. And at the end of GitKon, we'll announce 3 winners. Okay, so that brings me now to our next speaker. So Eran Yahav is the CTO of Tab9, a software company delivering AI-assisted development workflows. Let's learn the best practices for using AI tools and training custom models for unlocking the wealth of information inside your code base. Let's listen in.
Hi, I'm Eran. I'm going to talk about going from CI to AI, or how do we add an AI layer to our software organization. In the coming decade, all software is going to be generated with the assistance of AI. Either the code is going to be generated using AI, or it is going to be tested with the help of AI, reviewed using AI, or even deployed with the help of AI. So if you're an engineer or engineering manager, it is safe to assume that there is an AI in your future. And this is due to several factors. First, we're all facing the challenge of having to ship software with limited resources. We cannot hire all the engineers that we would like to hire. And even when we can hire them, hiring and onboarding them are so expensive. So we need to find other ways to move faster with the resources that we already have. Fortunately, there's an opportunity for automation here. As engineers, we know that at least part of our tasks are repetitive and can be at least partially automated. And in fact, code itself is highly repetitive and common, which is what makes things like Stack Overflow so effective. Finally, in recent years, we have seen the rise of very powerful ML models that train on massive amounts of data and can be used to generate text and images. And in fact, the images in my presentation so far, including this slide, have been automatically generated from the prompts that are shown at the bottom of each image. So when you take these powerful ML models and use them to train over code obtained from repositories, open source repositories with permissive licenses, and code from your own repositories, AI is starting to change how we do software development. In the past decades, organizations realized that having a solid source control and CI/CD pipeline is essential for shipping high-quality software. And they've built these nice pipelines going from code all the way to the deployment. And as you go through this pipeline, you're accumulating a lot of information in your system of record. So first of all, you have the code base, and the code base contains code that hopefully has been tested and reviewed. So it contains a lot of the patterns and best practices of how code should be written inside the organization. You also have test cases that historically ran on various versions of the code and either broke or passed successfully. So you get a lot of rich information from these past executions of tests. You also get past code reviews and what happened with them, what comments were made on what piece of code, et cetera, and also deployment logs. So you have all this rich information that is going to your system, starting with the source control and going to other artifacts. And now it is time to really reap the benefits of having all that information and learn from it in order to accelerate all stages of the software development lifecycle. And you can think of that as having another layer in your system, an AI layer that is learning from your system of record, learning from all the data that you've accumulated throughout the stages of the software development lifecycle in order to accelerate all the stages of the lifecycle moving forward. I'd like to make that slightly more concrete by showing an end-year vision for doubling the productivity of teams. So there are a lot of kind of points in this space. I'm not going to describe all of them. Generally speaking, the green ones are points that we are either working on or others are working on and we think are attainable within the next 12 to 18 months. The purple ones are a little bit further down the road, although if they're mentioned here, at least some research has been done on them and some results have been published, and I'm happy to kind of answer questions about those offline, but I'd like to at least describe some of the green points here on this slide in more detail to make it more concrete. So during the code phase, clearly we can do code generation for developers based on code that we have learned from either permissive open source repositories or from code inside your organization. So basically the idea here is to learn from past code in order to generate new code for you contextually. We can also train on private repositories, either all the repositories in your organization or a subset of them, to better capture patterns that are unique to your organization or to a particular project you're working on. Importantly, one of the features that our users are always asking for is a way to capture, beyond what the AI has learned from the code base, a way to capture what the experts in the organization know and teach the model how to propagate this kind of expert knowledge to the entire team. And the idea here is to use AI with some human guidance to propagate expert knowledge to the entire team, making them aware of kind of expert guidance as they are generating new code. There are other things that are relatively close by, like automatic refactoring. Even when the code has been written already, the AI can recommend how to improve that by refactoring it automatically, and some work on code reading navigation. I'd like to skip ahead a bit and talk about test generation, which I think is a really compelling and very close use case. In test generation, the idea is to learn from both the code base in the project, the actual functional code, and from previous tests in order to generate new unit tests or larger tests, and et cetera, et cetera. Another one I'd like to mention during the review phase is AI code review, which can be done either in the pull request, merge request, or actually loop back all the way and show the results of code review in real time in the IDE. And again, the idea here is to learn from past defects or past reviews in order to predict reviews automatically without human involvement. And there are other things here that I will not describe. So even if we take a step back, there has been a lot of investment in the delivery part of the pipeline over the years. Like there's been a lot of work on how do we bring the solution faster to customers, like how do we accelerate testing, accelerate the process of review, accelerate the process of deployment. And these have seen a nice amount of automation without involvement of AI. So there's been a lot of improvement to these processes even before AI is arriving to the scene. In contrast, on the part of writing the code itself, which is where we as engineers solve the actual customer problems, there have not been much innovation actually in the last 30 years or so since the introduction of IntelliSense. So if you trace it back to its sources, it's actually more than 30 years probably. And this part of the process of writing code is actually the highest value add. But until AI, we had no way to tackle it. There was no kind of easy innovation on how to transform, how to accelerate the process of writing code. And I'd like to kind of drill down on that piece a little bit. So what we've been doing in the past few years is using generative AI models, notably large language models trained on millions of projects with permissive open source licenses to predict code. And this works in all IDEs and all common IDEs and for all languages. And it typically automates up to 30% of the code for our users. And it makes developers better and happier, makes them better because it suggests things that are like kind of the common patterns and therefore prevents error and keeps them in the flow. They don't have to context switch to look for solutions on Stack Overflow or elsewhere. And it makes them happier because it automates the mundane parts of the work. It automates exactly the parts of the work that we don't really enjoy and frees the developers to do the more creative and the work that actually solves the problems and not the boilerplate. And finally, what Tabnine is doing is safe and secure. You can run it anywhere, and you can also run it in your own private cloud if you're under some compliance restrictions. And I'd like to maybe concretize that even further by showing a quick demo. So I'm going to switch to my IDE here. And this is VS Code with the Tabnine extension installed. And you can look at it on Tabnine, just search for it and see that it's installed. Right, and you can see tab9, and it's quite popular. And you can just install it yourself the same way. We close this. And I dropped here into some Java code using Kafka. And it is creating a consumer. And what I'd like to do here is I'd like to iterate over all the records that are coming from the consumer and print them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell tab9 that this is what I would like the code to do. I want to iterate over all records and print them. And at this point, what tab9 does, it contextualizes on everything that is happening in the editor here, and the gray piece of code that has been automatically generated here has been automatically generated by tab9 in real time based on all the context in my project and on the context in the current file, including both code and the natural language hint that I gave it. And I can just hit tab to accept this suggestion, which now becomes part of my code. You can see that it uses the Eran consumer that has been defined here, and it correctly does the polling with some duration of 1 second, etc., and even increments the total counter that should have been incremented in the context of this problem. To summarize, AI assistance makes your team better by using AI models. You get your team aligned, you get more consistent code, faster development by automating the mundane parts, fewer errors by everyone consuming the same best practices and known patterns, which also leads to more efficient code review, and obviously to faster onboarding, because even new developers get suggestions based on what has been learned from the code base. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Well, thank you, Eran, for that session. If you have questions for our speaker, please head over to our Discord server to post your questions, and we'll be more than happy to continue that conversation all throughout GitKon. Next, we want to honor those of you who have been with us during all of day one stream so far, from the very beginning, with a break. Let's give you an opportunity to stretch your legs, take a bio break, grab a cup of coffee or tea. And what we'll do is we'll set up a timer. We'll put something up that's aesthetically pleasing and fun to listen to. And stay tuned. We'll be back in just a little while.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to meet with Justin and I. I'm here with Justin Roberts. He's the Director of Product at GitKraken, and I'm Manning Fisher, the Creative Director for GitKraken. We're going to talk to you today about design being the difference, why UX and UI are vital in creating great developer experiences. So thank you, Justin. I'm really interested to get some of your thoughts and try to unpack some of this material with you today. I'll just go ahead and kick this off with why is design so critical for the developer experience?
Yeah, I think when I think back to like typical developer tools, tools that were designed 10, 15, 20 years ago, good design is not really a word that jumps out to me. I think that they were typically designed to be purely functional, right? They had a very specific task they were trying to solve, and it was just, how can we do that in the easiest way possible or the most efficient way possible? And efficiency is totally still a major factor in considering designing developer tools, but I think that developers still do appreciate good design. Whether they can articulate what good design is or not, they do know when a product is designed with care, when it looks good, when it feels good, and when it is also efficient. I think those are all things that kind of can be encompassed in really good design.
Yeah, I really appreciate that answer there. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what is it like to design tools that will be used by literally millions of developers around the world? And is there ever a moment or in a release when you're introducing a meaningful user experience change that you panic before launch or delivery?
Not a lot of panic, but there's definitely concern that we're doing things the right way. I would say, first off, it's super rewarding to be able to build tools and applications and anything that millions of people are going to touch and use every day. I think we have a big responsibility to do that right. But when you know that there are that many people using it, you take a lot more care and put a lot more thought into the decisions that you make whenever you're building things. And luckily, we have a lot of really adoring fans who use our products, who love our products, and talk about that every day. We get feedback from users in multiple channels on Twitter, through our internal systems, from people who just write to tell us how much they really like using the product. We also get the opposite. We get people who are critical, but that's good. I mean, I think that helps us continue to iterate and improve on what we're building. But when you do ultimately build those things and you see the impact that it has on people and their day-to-day lives, and you see that it's actually making things work better for them and giving them a better experience with something that's as complicated as Git, then I think that that's super rewarding.
Yeah, I love your point about having a bias for action. And in your previous comment about any bit of data, whether it's positive or negative, is good to take that feedback, and then you can help apply it to lessons learned and knowledge gained with how you build moving forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool. Developers are famous for being very demanding. They're an exacting audience. So what's your favorite part about building products for that developer audience? And what's your least favorite part?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of my favorite and least favorite parts maybe is that developers are incredibly honest and straightforward with their responses. Developers are not going to sugarcoat how they feel about your product, right? They're going to be brutally honest, and they're going to give you the exact feedback that you need to fix problems or to make things better. But luckily, most of that feedback is constructive. They know exactly what to say, what to point out, because they build software themselves. So they understand what it is that you're looking for to help improve the product. So I think we have an advantage, and that's one of the nice things in building developer tools, is that the developers are going to understand our plight the same way that we understand their plight. We're trying to help their day-to-day life, and they know what we need to do to improve the products for them. So it's nice having an audience that can clearly articulate what exactly it is that they need. But they do have they are demanding. right? As anyone should be when they're using software that is highly technical and used day to day to improve your work that you're working on.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying about developers specifically being very opinionated. I personally think that's one of my favorite parts about working with them as well, is they know exactly what they want and how they want it. Sometimes it's very easy to take that kind of requirement and build off of it.
There's a lot of design that approaches from the other direction, right? It is much more data driven. It's much more focused on doing a lot of research. So a question to you is, minus just the intuitive part of design, how do you measure the impact and efficacy of product design from maybe a more analytical way?
Yeah, that's a really great call out. We all have this theory or this hypothesis that what we're building is going to solve a problem and ideally surface specific results. Measuring the effectiveness of an idea is critical to understanding if our hypothesis was correct or not. And this makes it really important to be problem focused. It's helpful to ensure that you know exactly what problem you're trying to solve for. And you can measure the outcomes based on how users interact with your product or the software by using empirical and statistical evidence. And by empirical, I mean, if you have verified evidence firsthand through observation, this can happen really effectively pre-release while you're still in the research phase of a product where you don't know yet if what you're building has the value that you're looking for. So you can build prototypes, you can create working models without actually developing them or using code to create these prototypes. You can use static imagery and other simple examples to just walk them through the basics of what your product can be. The other analysis here is, of course, statistical. And this means analyzing large quantities of numerical data. Perhaps you've released the product to a large audience and you can measure how they use the feature. If they were able to find the feature, how many people were able to click specific areas of the page? Did they find the buttons? Were they using the toolings effectively? How much time they spent on the feature, and other analytical information that can be then used to determine whether or not the product that you designed for had been used to the extent that you can qualify its effectiveness.
Yeah, there's a lot in there about like being a lot more measured in your approach to design. I'm curious, just personal question, like, do you prefer doing that kind of research before design or after you've already kind of taken a stab at something? Like where do you like prefer to have that more analytical approach to design? Do you want to know everything first and design, or do you want to kind of like try something out and then test it with people?
Yeah, I'm always on the fence with that one. And sometimes it comes down to budget. Honestly, if you're working for a business who has 6 months of runway and you're capable of spending, several hundreds of thousands of dollars to do those studies, then sure, it can be really fun. You learn a lot. It's a great learning exercise. I like your approach that you were describing earlier, just building as you go and discovering after the fact. It's very fun.
So I think we're coming about to the end of our time, Fisher, and I had one final question for you, and feel free to echo this back to me when you respond. But I'm curious for you if there are any developer-focused brands out there that you really admire or that you're inspired by from a product or UI perspective.
Crashlytics was a mobile crash reporting tool built many years ago. Ultimately, they have over 2.5 billion active devices using the SDK and over 600,000 mobile app developers using the product. And what I particularly enjoyed about this, and this was also very well heard in the community, was their stylistic approach to developing the technology. The skeuomorphism was pretty big during this era when they released the product. So you can see these heavy textures, very large drop shadows, and kind of realistic, the aesthetics being chosen. And what made it even more interesting is they took that technique into the product itself. So you can see one of their main dashboards has this massive zipper and this kind of denim textured background over one of the graphs that, while it serves no functional purpose, it's interesting, it's exciting, it's different. Some people hated it. They were very vocal. Why is this zipper sitting in my UI? It's like an obtrusive visual obstacle. But at the same time, it created a lot of jazz about it. There was a lot of conversation whether these things were applicable or not. It created just the appeal to the product itself. And these other pages, subsets of the product, you can see they're using this clipboard binding kind of leather textured background. And ultimately, over the years, the product evolved and turned into a more flat kind of modern interface. But also what was most interesting from my perspective in the users is that we use data to show things chronographically as often as possible. So while most software is typically just a bunch of pages full of tables and tabular data, what makes it interesting to look at emotionally is to have this massive graphic at the top that shows information in a different way. It's appealing on the eye, it's fun to use in general, and it helps serve a function for people to analyze information graphically within a product. And in order for us to get there, we studied different variations of information display, dashboard techniques, just how to show visual data visually in a way that was effective and appealing to the user. What are some of your experiences with brands that you admire or you're inspired by their great UX?
Yeah. I mean, I think like for me, one of the kind of like pinnacles is GitHub, right? You know, they really take a lot of care when they design their interfaces, and you can see that in their design team and their design systems that they build. They have an open source design system called Primer that, you know, kind of breaks down everything that is involved in the GitHub design system. And I think it just shows that they care enough about design for a technical audience that they put the effort into creating these experiences and using color and typography and spacing and everything to really make a product that people are going to like to use and is also highly functional, right? It's that good blend of form and function where it's not going to slow you down, it's not going to get in the way, but it's also going to have a positive impact on you. One other one that I've really been enjoying following is Linear App, which is an issue tracking software. I think that, you know, when you talk about minimalism and building a product that kind of strips away everything that you don't need and only shows you things that you need, that is embedded in everything that Linear does. The website, the product itself are really clear, really easy to use. And you can tell that they're also really targeted at developers. If you use Linear, you can see the way that they design their menus to show shortcut keys and the way that they use really simple iconography and theming to be customizable for the developer experience really shows that they put a lot of care into the design. And you can see that if you hear anyone's feedback about the product. You know, I'll look on Twitter and see people talking about Linear that are just saying like, oh, this is a really amazing piece of software to use. I love using Linear every day to track my issues. Well, you wouldn't really think that like people would feel that way about an issue tracker, but when you take care in crafting an application and an experience and using design to make that really impact people, you're going to see that kind of response. And I think that's what we're all striving for, right? Is to take that care in designing a tool that people are going to love enough to get onto Twitter and say like, oh man, I really love using this product.
Yeah, that's an excellent analysis. And I particularly enjoy the synthesis that you've had there, specifically with both of those products. And I use them myself quite often. So I can respect the breakdown that you've given.
Yeah, it was really good.
Justin, it's been picture. Yeah, Justin, it's likewise. It's been great. I appreciate your time today and look forward to seeing you on the other side, my friend.
All right. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Deadline due. Every now and then I get a little bit lonely from working so late. Pull request. Every now and then I get a little bit nervous that I accidentally rebase on prod. Yeah, I need to merge this brand. It's not gonna merge itself. Once upon a time there was light in my face. Now a rainbow graph in the dark. Nothing left to pull. A total commit of the heart.
Hi everyone, I'm DJ Schleen. I'm a distinguished security architect at Yahoo under the Paranoids and the security organization. And this is a presentation I call as far left as you can go. And it's a story about Git hooks and how to use them and how I use them every day. Now, when we talk about shift left, this is a term that I've started to get really tired of. Everyone talks about shifting left. You know, the closer you can to the developer with defects or quality issues, the better, right? And a lot of times when you say shift left or when you hear the term shift left, it's meaning everything that happens after you check in. So the CI, the CD, and the CD as you get that product out into the production environments, all of that, you want to take that information and shift it left. But even more important is actually having things in front of the developer in their own environment and in the tools that they use day to day, the engineering approach or engineering first approach to security. So Git hooks here for the win. You know, and the long and short of it is Git hooks just allow you to put supplemental or additional information into the way you interact with the Git executable on the command line. So for example, there's a pre-commit hook, and all this is just a bash script that sits in the Git or the private .git/hooks directory in your local repository, and this script is called pre-commit. And what happens is when you're committing code, that hook will get executed before the code actually gets pushed into the repository on that commit, or before you push it into the repository. So anything that you do inside of that Git hooks directory, as long as it conforms to the naming convention, then you can customize it and add additional tools and functionality to improve the quality of your code. So the options that we have here, there's a couple. The first way is we be a superhero. We dig in there, we do it ourselves. Or we can use another tool. A lot of them are open source, so we can use hooks. There's an application called Overcommit, Pre-Commit, Jig, AutoHook, Husky. There's a bunch of different tools you can use. I'm going to focus on hooks, which is a project that I helped create in the DevOps Kung Fu Mafia, an open source community on GitHub. This tool is written in Go. It works on any platform you want, and it doesn't require any runtime to be installed. Can also work with any IDE. Again, open source, and here's a screenshot of how it looks, and this is actually hooks running on itself. So when I do a commit in this case, we'll see that hooks is going through a bunch of commit steps. So if you want to get this and follow along with me, you can go to hooks and install it if you have Homebrew installed. So we could brew tap devops-kung-fu/homebrew-tap. And you can do a brew install again with DevOps Kung Fu brew tap/hooks with a Z. So make sure you put the Z on there. Let's take a look at this and actually see how Git commit hooks can actually be used in a sample environment written in Go. Okay, so here I am on the command line, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a repository in GitHub to track all this code that we're going to be doing in this demo. So GitHub repo create, tac clone, tac public, and I'll leave this up there for everyone afterwards. And we're going to put it in DevOps Kung Fu /GitKon. That's a good enough name there. If I can actually type properly. So create that repository, empty repository coming in here. So I'll get into that folder. I'm going to quickly touch main.go. And then I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. I'll take a look at it from there. Okay, so we have pretty much nothing here right now. So I'm going to do package main, and I'll just do a main function here. And I'm going to do just do a println here. And hello. And then I'm going to call another method here. I'm just going to call it done. Create a method, func done, and we're just going to say format println done. Okay, so what does this have to do with Git hooks? Well, I'll open up a terminal here inside this window and I'll show you what we have just out of the box here. So if we change into our .git/hooks directory, we're going to see a bunch of samples here. And we can just look a bit here at the pre-commit. And you'll see that it's just a bash script. Has a bunch of different things in it. Really, it's just here to be a placeholder in case you want to put something in here. So again, we can either just rename this file to pre-commit, put whatever script we want in, and that's fine. But I'm going to use a hooks as a utility here. So I already have hooks installed. So I'm going to change back into my previous directory here, and I have main.go. I'm going to do a go mod tidy, or go mod init, sorry. DevOps, github.com, DevOps, kung fu, and GitKon, and do a go mod tidy. Nothing much in there. And then I'm going to show you how to install hooks here. So we could be on any command line. We could be inside of Visual Studio Code. Again, hooks just works with anything. I have hooks again pre-installed using that homebrew tap that I let you know earlier. So now I'm going to initialize hooks, and I'm going to do a hooks init config. And what that'll do is it'll create a sample configuration here, and you'll see it's called hooks.yaml. And it's separated into a few sources. This is a type of pre-commit, and if I run this right now, it's just going to say hello hooks. And then there's a source that I can pull in here. It's another DKFM project called Hinge. Sources basically is just a bunch of Git packages that you can bring down and install locally. So go lint, a lot of these different things you'll see here. Instead of using this one's just the default one. I would do a hooks init, verbose, and verbose output. Now what verbose output does here is show us what's happening as we're committing code. So I'm going to commit this. We're going to see something that says hello hooks come out to the command line as I commit this into the repository. So let me do a git commit tac s tac am initial commit. So that will come up here, and you see it start saying hooks, hello hooks, and then branch main, nothing is tracked. So this is actually hooks getting called from that pre-commit that is getting called from Git when you're doing the repository commit. So I'm going to make this a little bit easier. I'm going to do git add dot, and now you'll see the hello hooks comes, the step passed, and it'll check it in the repository. Okay, great. Well, that's fine. We just said hello hooks. Let's take a different example. So what I'm going to do is I'll just copy another file in here, and now we can see the hooks that this uses. There's quite a bit. So on a pre-commit, this first step we do here is we'll do a git pull, and we just pull the latest just to make sure that we have no upstream changes. Then what we're going to do is we're going to tidy the mod file. We're going to go and update all the dependencies to latest. So this is pretty cool. Rather than having dependabot or some kind of thing hit it on the server and have you upgrade your dependencies, you can just do it here, and then when you check it in, at least it's updated from the last time you did it. Not saying that it's not going to change again. That's where dependabot comes in, hits on the server. What we're talking about here is moving a lot of this upgrade left so developers can test the latest versions without having to commit it and find out later. Again, it's closing that feedback loop there at DevOps. So we have Sift here, and Sift is generating a software bill of materials. Then we format the code to make it look pretty. We lint it. We do an error check on it to make sure things are handled. A cyclomatic complexity check, and here it basically will only fail if it's over 10. It'll run Hinge. Hinge is a DKFM project. That'll actually create a dependabot file for you. So as we run this, you'll actually see the Dependabot file being created and put into the repository. I build it to make sure it works. I test it to make sure we got coverage. And then I add everything back into the commit that's changed, and it goes up into the repository. So that's pretty cool. So we can mutate the contents of our commit during that pre-commit process. So let's see how this works. Now, the first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make this thing fail. So I'm going to fail on a lint, and this is basically just the command. So you exec go lint, and then these are the arguments that get passed. So I'm going to say set exit status here, and then this basically just says lint the entire folder structure. And that's all it really hooks is. You can check out the documentation. It's pretty easy. You can actually run scripts in here, a whole bunch of different things. So now we're going to commit this code here and see what happens. It should fail on that go lint because I don't have a comment. And there we go. Main.go exported function done should have a comment or be unexported. And then with this set exit status, it's going to fail. So I can hit control, click on it, come over here, and then I can add a comment. Prints done. There we go. Save that. Now I can come back and I can try committing that again. And we'll see everything passes. So the linting passes. Hinge automatically just created this GitHub folder. And we have our SBOM folder here with all of our software bill of materials. Everything got added into the commit, got thrown up into the remote repository. Let's take a look and see what happened here. And so we'll take a look at DevOps Kung Fu. We have our GitKon repository here, and here's all of the information. Probably should have put coverage.out into a git ignore, but here's your SBOMs automatically created. We have our Dependabot config that was created on the client side, and away we go. We're good to go. Well, thanks for joining me today for my talk at GitKon 2022. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference, and I hope you enjoyed going as far left as you can go. Thanks very much. I'm DJ.
It's been a minute, right? Well, I'm back, and hopefully you enjoyed that art of Git from a while back in the stream, along with some other musical selections. Many thanks to our speaker DJ for that session. If you wish to ask DJ questions, then I'll direct you to the Q&A that is happening in our Discord server. So you can join the Discord server by clicking the link below the video player. A quick reminder that the Discord server is only available for the duration of the conference. And if you are joining us from a different time zone, you're still welcome to post questions in that Discord server, even if you're watching the session after it happened during the stream. We can continue the conversation all throughout the 3 days of GitKon. Okay, so next we have a quick word from our sponsor.
Hey guys, I'm Jeremiah Zucker. I'm a full stack software engineer at Intuit.
Hey, my name is Nate Macarelli and I work over at Johnson Controls.
Hi, my name is Maisa and I'm a developer at Apple Developer Academy.
I originally discovered GitKraken through the GitHub Student Developer Pack, and since then I've never looked back.
GitKraken made what would have been an otherwise pretty daunting transition simple with great versioning controls and a really easy to follow UI.
When I first started version control, I was so confused on using terminal, and then I met GitKraken.
This UI is so much more friendly than other version control GUI alternatives, and by far my favorite feature is the tree view. Git can be so confusing at times, but this visualization tool has helped me and my team sort through many complex merges. This is a smaller example of one of my repos, but you can imagine just how complex it can get with a larger project. Anyways, keep up the good work!
So if you're interested, I'll leave a link here for how you can learn more about the Ambassador Program. Okay, but for now, I think it's time to introduce our next speaker. So Tomas Reimers is a co-founder of Graphite, a company that's rebuilding code review for fast-moving teams. Stacking is a workflow that involves developers branching off of previous feature branches rather than a trunk. Interesting. Let's learn why developers should consider stacking, how to make it easier, and tools that enable you to get started today.
Hi everyone, my name is Tomas. I'm one of the co-founders of Graphite, the company building code review for fast-moving teams. And today, I'm here to talk to you about stacked PRs, a workflow that we think helps you stay unblocked and develop quickly. So, we like to usually describe this workflow with a story. So let's imagine that, starting today, we're both developers for a new social media company. So we have users, those users create posts, and we want users to be able to comment on their posts. And not only do we want them to be able to comment on these posts, we want them to be able to react to each other's comments, meaning to attach an emoji that everyone else can see to that comment. Cool. So this is probably two features. We want to implement them both. They're both high pri. And so, being the diligent engineers we are, we go ahead, we write the code for commenting. Takes about 2,000 lines, touches many parts of the site, and we put up the PR. Great. We tag our reviewers, and now, well, now we're kind of stuck, right? We want to work on reactions, but because reactions depends on comments, we're in kind of a sticky situation because code review, as we know it, is predicated on this idea that I'm always developing off of main. And so I could go ahead and ask my reviewer to review my PR right now because I want to get this code into main so that I can branch off of it so that I can start reactions. Kind of shitty for both of us. They are suddenly thrashed where I'm asking them to take time out of their day to sit down, review this multi-thousand line PR, and maybe I need to do that to multiple people, especially if I'm touching many, many different parts of the site. It's also not great for me because I end up in this situation where I'm not really getting a wonderful review. I'm getting a probably pretty rushed review from a reviewer that has way too many other things to do. So door number two is I can go ahead and I can work on something else. I can thrash myself, right? Even though I know reactions is the highest pri thing I can be working on, I'm in this position where working on it actually is pretty difficult for me. And so instead, maybe I work on some bug fixes, maybe I clean something else up, maybe I work on a feature that I'm interested in, but regardless, I'm not working on the highest pri thing. The other thing I can do is I can go ahead and fold the reactions code into the comments PR, but then all of the challenges which I just described to you become worse because suddenly it's not a 2,000 line change, it's a 4,000 line change. It touches many more parts of our code base, and suddenly getting this reviewed and getting it out to users is going to take forever and a half and probably involve a lot of merge conflicts. So what am I to do? Well, most of us are going to opt usually to wait, and so we wait. We wait because, as I said, code review is usually based on this idea that we're constantly breaking off of main. We're creating pull requests back into it, and then we're going from those into new pull requests. And so we wait until eventually we get reviewed, we get merged, and we sit and wonder, does it have to be this way, right? What if I didn't have to branch off of main? Is there something else we could be doing? Well, let's spitball for a second. What if that second PR, those reactions, I just went ahead and I opened up off of comments. And so rather than having this feature branch comments, which we create a pull request in and then stop, I have this feature branch comments, I create a pull request for it, and then I continue to develop on top of it. And I go ahead and develop reactions and I create a pull request for that, leading to have two open pull requests with dependencies between them. Well, this is stacking. That's all it is. It's this idea of having multiple open pull requests that we can review independently, that we can merge in sequential order because they do have dependencies, but we can continue developing even though the dependent branches have dependencies which have not yet been approved or merged into main. And once you start stacking, you realize, well, why not take this further? Comments actually isn't really one change, right? It's probably many changes. That's how we think about it as developers. There are database changes involved, there are API level changes involved, there's UI involved. Who knows? Perhaps there are many different things. Perhaps there are many different microservices even that we touch to make it happen. Why do I, as a developer, have to put that all in one PR, which then has to get many, many different reviewers, when instead I could break that out into multiple PRs? And when you start stacking, this is what you usually see. You break out these dependent changes into a sequence of PRs that can be reviewed and merged independently. And so, beyond keeping you unblocked, there are a few advantages to this approach. One is you just get better reviews. I know I was talking about it earlier, but imagine the difference between having to review two, call it 400 line PRs and 1,000 line PR. it's usually much harder to get the 1,000-line PR's context into your head, to understand what all the different systems are, how they work, and to even know what you should be reviewing. Frequently, if I'm tagged as a reviewer in a multi-thousand-line PR, I may have context on part of the code base, but perhaps I don't have context on all of it. And so when you break out these changes, it's easier for people to identify, oh, this is the one that needs my review, this is my area of expertise, this is what I can add here. 2, because I'm getting better reviews and faster reviews because these are smaller, I can merge faster. And merging faster means that everything else in our development cycle moves faster. Other people can start to build on top of that faster. I can start to iterate faster on the experience as it goes out to users faster. We can start to deploy faster. And the last part of it, building on that, is that we have fewer conflicts. Because I'm not forking off of main and developing in my own branch for days at a time, everything is being kept in sync together faster. And so the chance that I have a merge conflict is smaller, and if I do have a merge conflict, it's probably easier to resolve. Now, this isn't a new idea. Actually, if you were to go ahead and open Google's Eng Practices wiki hosted on GitHub, they have a whole page on why write small code review. Small code reviews, as I said, are reviewed more quickly. They're more thoroughly reviewed. They're less likely to introduce bugs, and when they do introduce bugs, they're easier to revert. And not only is this not a new idea, there are even memes about it. People talk around how 10 lines of code equals 10 issues, but 500 lines of code looks fine. That's because no one's reading your 500-line PR. At best, they're taking a once-over. They're saying, this looks fine. I'll let you figure out if it has a bug. And then they're just approving it. And that's not good for the company as a whole. Taking that all into account, it sounds as if we had smaller PRs, life would just be better. So why don't we all do this? Why is this a thing that we are even having a conversation about? And the truth is that today, a lot of our process and a lot of our tooling doesn't really support it. The first thing it doesn't support is that it can become hard to rebase. So in the example of comments, let's say that I go ahead and I write comments, I write reactions, and then someone says, actually, for comments, we want the UI to look slightly differently. Well, that's fine. I can update the branch. I'm used to doing that all the time. But how do I move reactions on top of the new branch or on top of the new commit that's in that branch? That's a rebase operation, which, while possible in Git, is probably one that you and I would have to look up because we don't know it off the top of our head. Door number 2 is it's hard to visualize, both for the author and a reviewer. It can be hard enough to know what branch another branch is descendant of. Git doesn't actually keep that information in its own in-memory store. And we, as developers, rarely visualize our Git tree. We usually just assume, I know there's a linear history and I know that I branch off of it. And not only is it hard for us as authors, it's hard for us as reviewers. If you come to me as a reviewer and say, hey, here's a PR reactions, and it's based on a lot of code that I don't understand, I'm likely to be like, what am I reading? Where is this coming from? What is this other code? What's the context? And then lastly, it's harder to merge. It doesn't have to be, which is the interesting thing, but it certainly is, in the sense of if I have 3 PRs which are all dependent on one another, and I want to go ahead and merge all 3, right now it's a fairly manual process. I go ahead and I close the first branch. I then go ahead, rebase the second one, wait for it to pass, close it. I then go ahead, rebase the third one, wait for it to pass, close it. And that process takes a lot of time. Now, being a developer, I hear these and I say, well, these actually all seem like fairly automatable problems. So is this a place that tooling can help? And the short answer is yes, absolutely. Now, there are many tools that help you navigate stacked PRs. I, working at Graphite, am most familiar with the tool, and so that's the one I'm going to choose to talk about. But many of the features that I'm discussing are not unique to Graphite, but are common across tools that help support stacked PRs. So, the first challenge we talked about, hard to rebase. With Graphite, or with many of these tools, when you go ahead and create a commit on a branch, which is a dependency of another branch, it's automatically detected for you, and then those upstack branches are rebased for you. In the event that you have a rebase conflict, so let's pretend that we have database changes, API changes, UI changes, and then reactions. In the event that the API changes had a rebase, create a merge conflict up the stack as we're restacking, what happens is that Graphite will go ahead, it'll drop you into merge conflict resolution, the same that you would for any Git merge conflict. You go ahead, you resolve it, you type GT continue, and then it automatically takes that change and applies the upstack for you, such that you only have to apply rebase conflicts once. We find that this is frequently a fear of people who have never used the workflow, and once you start using the workflow, you find that resolving rebase conflicts is easier than you expect because your changes are smaller than you're used to. And two, they don't actually happen as commonly as you would think. It's frequent that we think, yes, I need to change this part of the code base. For example, I need to change the UI of comments, and that may affect reactions. But in truth, these parts of code tend to be separated, and so changing one doesn't necessarily affect the other. Two, it can be hard to visualize. In Graphite, when you go ahead and you create a stack, we go ahead and visualize that for you in our web UI. It can show you exactly what the status is of each part of the stack is. It can go ahead and show you which ones are ready to be merged, which ones are not. It shows you the dependencies, and it does so not only for simple stacks, for example, the linear one I just described, but for complicated one, where you have one parent branch which has multiple children. Not only does it do this in the Graphite web UI, but when you submit through Graphite, it automatically goes ahead and posts a comment to GitHub showing you what this visualization looks like so that both you and your author can be kept up to date on, okay, these are the branches involved, this is where they are, and this is what I'm reviewing. Lastly, merging. Before I described a very manual process that if you've experimented with stacking or perhaps you've experimented with branching off a branch, you've probably had the misfortune of dealing with. In Graphite, you can go ahead, select a stack, and say, merge this for me. And what it will do is it will go ahead, it will take the basemost branch, it will merge it in, it will then go to the next branch, rebase it, and then merge it in, and it will then go to the next one, rebase it, and merge it in. Or if you simply want a faster atomic merge, what you can do is you can tell it to squash all 3 branches into one commit, and then automatically merge that into main. So in short, yes, this is a place that tooling can help. Stacking is a workflow that becomes very possible and keeps you unblocked as you adopt tooling to make it more possible for yourself. In short, you should stack your changes, which allows you to write smaller PRs, which allows you to receive better reviews, and which ultimately allows you to ship faster. Thank you. For any questions, comments, and concerns, again, my name is Tomas. Feel free to email me at tomas@graphite.dev. Happy to respond and happy to talk more about this workflow. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, so next we have a series for you. So GitKon 2021 happened last year, and we had a number of excellent talks. And so we wanted to do a rewind series. And so we have for you our first rewind with our keynote speaker from last year, Matt Billman. Take it away, Matt.
If you're old enough like me, you'll remember the world before Git very well. Before Git, there were other early stages of decentralized source control, but what we were all typically using day to day was centralized source control systems like Subversion. At the time, Subversion was really the most common source control system. It was also open source. It was based around a repository always running on a source control server, typically behind Apache's HTTP server, and you would set up every repository as a server that the different clients would then connect to, and they would copy a local working copy down to your own machine, to your own computer, to your own laptop, and the server would really be the single source of truth. And you would have to really maintain that server. You would have to be a systems operator to some degree to have your Subversion system running. You would also really typically not set up a new Subversion server from some hobby project or for something small, a little scratch pad you were working on. Subversion servers they felt like sort of more of a real thing, and it was more of an always operations task to have them running on some Linux machine somewhere that you could connect to and that you could update and upgrade over time and keep track of. And then something really magical happened the first time I got introduced to Git. And I want just everybody to remember how impressive this was when you saw it the first time, especially when you came from this world of Subversion based main repositories and so on. When I first saw Git, what I saw really felt like magic rather than just a small change in one source control system or another.
Hello everyone, today I'm talking about GitHub Pages. The title of my talk is GitHub Pages Reimagined. Deploy your first website without leaving your IDE. All right, so I'm actually not going to start with talking about tech. I'm going to talk about a country called Guyana. And Guyana is where my parents were born. It is located in South America, and it is the only country in South America where the official language is English. But that doesn't mean they only speak English over there. They also speak like Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Hindi, and so many other languages. That country has a fusion of different cultures. Like you can definitely see in the food and music that it has a heavy influence of like Indian and Afro-Caribbean culture. But although I love the food and music, my favorite part about Guyana is some of the sayings they have. So they speak this thing called Guyanese Creole, which is an English dialect, and they have some hilarious sayings. So let me try to say one for you. If anyone here is watching and you are Guyanese or you're Caribbean and you're like, that's not how you say it, well, I'm sorry. I'm very Americanized, so please bear with me. But one of my favorite sayings is, monkey make you pick me till he spoil him. And this is something like my mom always said to me if she saw me like putting too much ingredients in a pot, or like if I was doing like arts and craft or something as a kid and she saw me like adding way too much like sparkles or something, that's what she would say. And what it really translates to is like, don't try to overdo something, keep it simple. And we have that similar saying in tech. It is an acronym called KISS, which stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. Now, I don't like the word stupid. It's a little crass, so we're gonna act like that part doesn't exist, like that last S isn't there. But although we have that saying in tech, I wonder if we've actually taken our own advice. And we will explore that in a second, but a quick commercial break to just learn about who I am. So my name is Rizel Scarlett. I am a junior developer advocate at GitHub. I've been a software engineer for about 3 years, and I'm pretty addicted to social media. So if you like social media too, you can go ahead and follow me at Black Girl Bytes. That's me on literally every social media platform except on Twitch. I am Black Girl Bytes 1 because I forgot my password and I got locked out of my account. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a throwback to the internet, so we can figure out if we've actually kept it simple. Throwback to the early 2000s. So around that time, I was about 5 to like 12 years old, I guess. So this was my internet in the early 2000s. I was using AIM, Mycene, Dazzling Nails, Millsbury, Neopets, The Doll Palace, LimeWire. Yes, I was downloading music illegally. But also I loved MySpace. And I signed up for MySpace like way before the age limit. So like I think the age limit was 15 and I was 11 and I was like, I don't care. As you can see, me and authority, we I don't listen to rules that much. But I really loved MySpace. It's where I learned HTML and CSS just so I can have a cooler profile than my friends. And I feel nostalgic about those days. Like the web has changed so much, mostly for the better, but as web apps have become more complex, so does web development. So does the experience for engineers. While some things have become easier, like I've heard of what the days before Git were like, sounded terrible. There's still been things that I'm like, maybe we're adding too much complexity. And I myself am guilty of it. But before we figure out about how I've been guilty about it, let's look at the evolution of the web. This is my really bad graph of how the web has evolved over time. So it's not accurate. It's just according to me. It's just a graph according to me. So we've gone from HTML, and then we're like, okay, we're going to introduce like these component-based frameworks like React and Vue. And now we're starting to think about reactivity and partial hydration. And like at one point, writing JavaScript on the back end was so revolutionary with Node.js. But now we have like the fastest JavaScript runtime called Bun. And back then we were like writing code on servers. But now we have containers where we can have the same environment wherever we go. And I want to challenge us to think about, like, do we need all of these all the time? Okay, so naturally, I do think that this evolution would happen as time goes on, as humans want to improve things. And I do think it's generally beneficial. But sometimes I do see us go for a new technology just because it's fun and trendy, and not asking ourselves, like, do we actually need this? So I've also done the same thing. I've opted for more complexity, and here's an example of how I did that. I built this website. Let's go over here. I built this website last year just for, I don't know, I joined GitHub and I was like, I don't know what I do. I'm just going to use GitHub's API and figure out what I'm supposed to do as a developer advocate. And basically all it does is fuzzy searching. So all you can do is, like, if you type BO, it'll show you emojis that start with those letters, or AM. Yeah, that's all it does. But I built it with multiple technologies like Next.js, Tailwind CSS. What else did I use? AWS S3 bucket, Fuse.js, Pulumi, like all the works just for this one static website. And I was thinking, like, maybe I could have made this simpler, starting by like hosting it on GitHub Pages or something nice and easy. So let's go back to the slide deck and I'll explain more. So the reason why I'm thinking like I could have used GitHub Pages is there would have been an ease of use that I can host my static web app where I store my code, rather than introducing new technologies and other technologies. I could have just had my code living in the same place that my web app lives. And for folks who don't know what GitHub Pages is, it is a feature within GitHub that allows you to host static web apps for free. And it's not new. It was created in 2008, and that's exactly when GitHub was created. So it was one of our first features. And I started to explore, like, why haven't I used it that much? Like, I remember using it when I first learned to code in 2018 to host my first portfolio, and then I abandoned it. And I determined that one of the reasons was, like, I thought GitHub was kind of hard and Git was kind of hard. Like, I kind of avoided it all because I was new to coding and everything was overwhelming. So recently, I built a VS Code extension where you can deploy your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript website without leaving your IDE. So we are going to see that happen. So it's already installed, this extension in this demo. It's called Deploy to GitHub Pages by Black Girl Bytes, me. And right here, I have an index.html file. I'm going to go ahead and open up the command palette. And I'm going to say, yes, I want to sign in to deploy to GitHub Pages. Continue. I sign in. Should be done. Perfect. Now what it does is it gives me a list of repos that, like, which one do I want to publish? That's what it's asking. Choose the repo I want to publish. I want to publish this particular one called GitKon example pages. The most recent one is say publish, and then it will give me this pop-up that says my page will be available soon. If I can just highlight it. Come on. And I do not want to record this over, just to highlight something. There we go. That's good enough. I will type in HTTP. Ooh. See how that goes. Alrighty. And we get a 404. Why is that? Because GitHub Pages is now powered by a GitHub action. So if we head on over to our repository, we'll see an action like happening live, right? So it goes through a build process, and a report and build status, and then a deploy process. So right now the build process just completed, and here's where you can see the logs if anything goes wrong or goes right. And now it's going through the report and build status and the deploy. So we'll just wait a minute. It shouldn't take too long for this to happen. So it already set up the job, and then it deployed it. Oh, it is completed now. So we can go back to this website and we'll see that it's now live, and it says, hey, GitKon. That's exactly what I typed. And I think it's can be a better way than actually configuring it in GitHub if you're not too familiar with it. And it also like shows you the link here if you don't have it. All right, so back to the slides. So that's me lowering it for beginner, or lowering the barrier for beginner developers. But I started thinking about myself, like today, like would I today, as someone that writes in React now, use GitHub Pages? So all the different frameworks I've used, GitHub Pages at first did not make it easy to deploy sites that are using React or Astro or Next.js. And I was like, it's just a lot of configuration. So I've always defaulted to other newer technologies that I thought made it easier. But guess what? GitHub Pages now enables you. They now release support for deploying any static site generator or static framework to GitHub Pages. So that's if you're using Next.js, Astro, whatever. GitHub Pages now makes it easy for you, and I will show you how. So right here, I have this Next.js site, and GitHub Pages is not enabled in it at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my settings, and I'm going to go to pages. And instead of choosing deploy from branch, which is what people often do, or what was the initial default, you can now choose to deploy it using a customized GitHub Action workflow. The cool thing is GitHub Actions can identify what language this is built in, and it has a custom workflow built just for you. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next.js, and then I'll zoom out just a little bit. Here it's created a workflow for me, a GitHub Action workflow, and all I got to do is commit it. I'll commit the file. The action will start running in a few. Yeah, here it is. It's running. And now this takes a little bit of a while, and I don't want to reach our 12-minute mark. So what I'm going to do is show you a final example of this. So if I go over to where I forked this from and go to the website itself, this is hosted on GitHub Pages. You can see and tell because it has blackgirlbytes.github.io, which is the domain for all GitHub Pages, and it's my Next.js site, completely hosted, completely working. And basically that is it, y'all. You can now use GitHub Pages. I would implore you to go ahead and check this out. They have some awesome documentation. Check out my blog post that's accompanied by this talk, and you will be able to get a chance to learn more. All right, bye, y'all.
Thank you, Rizel, for that session. If you have questions about the last speaker's talk, please head over to our Discord server and post those questions in the Q&A. If you haven't already, hopefully there's a vigorous discussion happening already. As you could probably tell, maybe it's time for me to grab a cup of coffee, and maybe you'd like to join me. So we have another, we're going to put on another nice background, aesthetically pleasing video in front of you and set a timer and let you know when we'll come back for the rest of GitKon Day 1. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, I'm Reynald Adolphe, and in this session, I want to share a few gems about VS Code that many don't know. Now, there's two parts of this session. The first is branch management. By using VS Code's UI for Git commands, thereby avoiding the terminal, but I'll show you how to see how VS Code execute Git commands behind the scenes. Now, part two will be about documentation in VS Code. That is how it often is used for document management in private repositories. But let's start with branch management with some common commands back to back. Two common commands to create a branch include git branch and git checkout. Git checkout -b followed by the branch name creates and checks out a new branch, while git branch followed by the branch name creates a new branch but leaves you on your current branch. So let's see what command Visual Studio Code uses when we use its UI to create a branch. Now here I have an index.html file that I've already staged and committed. And on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that we're currently on our main branch. But to create a branch, I will simply hit the shortcut Shift Command P here since I'm on a Mac, and I will choose Create Branch. I'll give it the name Staging Branch. And let's create another one called Testing Branch. And to see what Visual Studio Code did on the back end, if we check the Git output, we could see on the first line, Git checkout was used to create Staging Branch, and a little later on, it was used again to create Testing Branch. When you're using Git, in order to list your branches, the git branch command is used. But with VS Code, in order to list the branches that we're working with, all we need to do is click on the bottom left-hand corner, the current branch that you're on, and then on the top of the screen, you'll get a list of our local branches. In order to switch between branches, two commands that can be used include git switch followed by the branch name, and also git checkout followed by the branch name. In terms of switching branches, both are effective, but I do encourage you to check out the official Git documentation for the history of these two commands, which is beyond the scope of this demo. But to see how to switch between branches in VS Code, all we need to do is hop onto the bottom left-hand corner where our current branch is, and right now we are on the testing branch. If we wanted to go to staging branch, just select it at the top of the screen, and now you see that staging branch is what's current. And if we scroll up to the beginning of the Git output, you see that git checkout was used to switch to staging branch. In order to rename a branch, we use the git branch command followed by -m and then the branch name. In VS Code, all we need to do is use our shortcut Shift Command P, select rename branch, and let's rename this to staging 2 branch. And if we hop on over to our output, we could see that on the first line, git branch was used in order to rename our branch. When deleting a branch in Git, the command that we use is git branch followed by -d and the branch name. Now in Visual Studio Code, if we wanted to, let's say, delete this branch here called staging 2-branch, which is really not a great name, we can switch over to another branch, and then using the command palette, we have an option to delete branch. And at this point, I can select staging 2 branch. And if we look at our Git output, you can see on the first line, the git branch command was executed. Pretty cool, hey? Now, the other gem that I wanted to share was about document management. And this could be for simple instructions, keeping code snippets, or detailed API documentation. Let's check it out. Documenting in VS Code is straightforward using Markdown language, which is a lightweight markup language to add formatting to text. There are alternatives, but we'll use Markdown for this demo. So to learn more, you can check out this site here. Right now I have an opened blank folder, so let's create a document for reminders like a shopping list amongst other pieces of information. So I'll go ahead and get started here by creating a file called reminder.md for Markdown. And Visual Studio will recognize that it's Markdown, as you can see on the bottom right-hand corner. And you'll see why some people love this, because it's almost like writing HTML, but in a much simpler fashion. So for example, if you wanted to write a header that said shopping list, you just use the # followed by shopping list. And to preview what you're seeing, just hit Command K, let go of the keys, and press the letter V. Now if I wanted to add a second header, a subheading like H2 for items, I just do 2 $. So look at how easy that is. If I wanted to do a numbered list, just type in 1, and my first item will be a laptop, 2, a big mouse, and 3, an SSD hard drive. Let's say I wanted to add an image. I could add that to the root of my folder. We'll close out this view here. And to add the image, all I need to do is drag it and hold the Shift key, and that will allow me to specify where I want it within my code and drop it. And it automatically puts the right formatting to display the image. So now you could already get a sense of how easy it is to create detailed documentation in a nice formatted way. Let's say I wanted to add some JavaScript code. If I paste that in, that doesn't look very nice, right? But if we add 3 ticks and then specify the language like JS here, now it recognizes it. And then all we need to do is close with another 3 ticks where your code ends. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see how nicely formatted that is. So now let's say you're inputting a lot of documentation together and it needs to be in multiple pages. Well, you'll probably want to have links that navigates from one page to another. So to create a link, all you need to do is add the description of your link within brackets like this. Link to more info in this readme.md, and then the destination of the page. So it's going to point to another file called readme.md. And as you can see, there's the link. So I don't have that page in my folder yet. So let me go ahead and just drop that in. I'll close this automatic view that popped up. And now if I go and click on the link, it brings up the page. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at the contents of it in a full view. After closing those windows, I could do Command K, V. And if we glance down here, we can see all the different syntax that's required to get the results that you see on the right-hand side, such as block quotes, lists, be it unordered or ordered, code, which we already went over, tables, etc. So by looking at this, you can see how detailed and neat documentation can be with all of these different ways of formatting, and the learning curve is extremely low. And that's really nice. So now if I'd like to publish this, I can go ahead and click on source control on the right-hand side, choose initialize repository. I'll enter in first commit. I didn't stage, so it's prompting me if I want to stage. I'll say yes and hit publish. And I will save this to a private repository called mygitproject_c. And if we take a look at it, we'll see the results. And if I were to go to my reminder doc, scroll down, I could see our original document that we put together with our code and our link, which works here also. Now you just saw that I had to commit, stage, and push my content after I was done. But if I'm working with a lot of document, I might not want to have to remember to keep doing that over and over. So this is where an extension like GitDoc comes into play, which is an extension that automatically commits, push, pulls changes on save, almost like you were in a Word document. So whenever you hit save, it will push and commit for you. Now it does this every 30 seconds or so, which you can modify. So let me first make sure that it is enabled. I'll hit Shift Command P and I see Git doc. It was cached, so it shows it right away. It is enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to really big mouse and hit save. And on source control, it should now commit for me within a few seconds. And there it goes. So now if we go ahead and check on GitHub and refresh our screen, it should change from big mouse to really big mouse for number 2. So there's a lot more to Git doc that you can review and experiment with, like these features mentioned here. But there's also a host of other extensions that are specifically designed for document management, like Dendron, Mintlify, Foam, and more. So go ahead and check them out and get a feel for what you prefer. So one last thing I'd like to show you is how you can access your project using Visual Studio Code online. That's vscode.dev by opening up a remote repository and specifying your URL here. Or in my case, I was already just in here, so I can just select it from recently opened. And now I can come here and make whatever changes that I want. If I wanted to change this to very fast laptop, I'll just come here to source control, make sure I stage my changes, and I'll type in second commit, click the check to accept. And if we come here to check my changes, very fast laptop is displayed. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this session and enjoy the rest of the conference.
We are nearing the end of GitKon 2022 Day 1. And so it's worth it for me to recap on some of the things you might have missed if you're just joining us in the stream. So first of all, if you are just joining us in the stream, welcome. You can join the Discord server via the link below. And this is where we're having Q&A for all of our sessions. So the previous session was with Reynald. So if you want to post questions and continue the conversation there, we invite you to do so from our Discord server. Same goes for all sessions that have happened so far today. You might see that there's plenty of conversations happening right now. Or if you are joining us for Day 2 and Day 3, remember that you can join during the speaker session itself. If a question pops in your head, feel free to post that question, as our speakers will be on hand during their session to answer questions. Okay, so that was the first thing you might have missed. The next thing is that we have a contest that is happening. It's called the Kraken Art Giveaway. And you may have already seen on the Watch Live page on gitcon.com/watch-live, there is one of the 3 custom art designs has been unlocked. So each day of GitKon, one of those designs will unlock, and then you have the opportunity to download that custom art. And the way that you enter into our contest is you post on Twitter a picture of you with that artwork somewhere in the background. It could be on your screen, for example. And at GitKraken, leave the hashtag GitKon and share something that you've learned so far in the conference. That will enter you into a contest to win a hoodie with one of the custom art designs, along with a $100 Amazon gift card. You can enter every single day to increase the probability that you'll be one of our 3 lucky winners that will be announced at the end of GitKon. Wow. Okay, that's a lot. But there's still more, because earlier today we announced the launch of the Foundations of Git certification course by GitKraken. So if you're looking to sharpen up your Git knowledge, or if you feel like this would be an excellent resource to someone in your life, in your network, on your team, then direct them to learn.gitkraken.com, where anyone can enroll for free and learn the basics of Git with motion graphics, with examples, and there's a certification exam at the end for them to test, or you to test their knowledge. This is typically around a $70 value based on how other Git tutorials stack up online. So we're making this available for free to our GitKon audience and everyone else as well. All right, with that, let's get into our next session.
This is Delete Your Code. Hi, I'm Mike Miles. I've been a developer for over 15 years, mainly in web development. Currently, I'm the director of web development at MIT Sloan, the management school for MIT, where my team and I are responsible for the public-facing web properties of MIT Sloan, such as the website. If you want to know more about me, you can find me on my website at mike-miles.com, as well as all over the internet with the handle MikeMiles86. So on GitHub, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on the GitKon Discord, that's my handle. Okay, so delete your code. 3 words that are very important for developers of any experience and any skill level to understand and utilize. And I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, you're going to understand the benefit of knowing when and how to delete your code. But let's take a step back and talk about code bases, especially active code bases. Active code bases are ones that are continually changing, ones that you're working on, be it for days, for weeks, for months, or even years. And active code bases go through a cycle of changes. The first part of this is that you're gathering requirements, understanding what problems you're trying to solve, what value your code base is trying to deliver. You take those requirements and you build out functionality, updating functionality, changing functionality, adding or removing features. And then you're taking those changes you're making and hopefully you're refactoring them in some way, updating your code, optimizing it so that it best delivers the values and meets those requirements. And then you're going back through and analyzing the next set of requirements you have, any changes, requirements, and you're working through those as well, and you're going through this cycle. Now, as you're making these changes, what you're going to come to find out is that in most code bases, what they should contain is only the code that delivers that needed functionality. That the only thing that should be in your code base is what meets those needs and delivers that functionality and meets those requirements, and nothing more. Well, what else could a code base contain other than code that delivers functionality? It can contain obsolete code. Obsolete code are those unused variables, functions, and objects that exist in your code base but are no longer being used for whatever reason. Or there's functions, methods, and objects that have been deprecated and replaced by newer versions or updated models, but they still exist. Or then there's whole sets of files, old CSS, old JavaScript, third-party plugins and dependencies that are no longer needed or don't serve a purpose or meet the needs of the code base of the project. These are all examples of obsolete code. Now, having obsolete code in your project doesn't necessarily mean it's detrimental, but most obsolete code can cause problems in an active code base. What sort of problems can obsolete code cause? Obsolete code decreases the readability of your code base. It makes it harder for another developer or yourself in the future to understand what that piece of code is doing, because you have to go through and sort through additional code that doesn't need to be there. In this JavaScript example we have, there's a variable called cart total on line 3, 4, and 5 that is then being processed, but it's not actually being used. Instead, there's another variable on line 6 that is called total that is being used instead in the rest of the code. So this cart total variable here is not being used. It's obsolete, but it's decreasing the readability by still being in place. Obsolete code increases the complexity of your project by having obsolete code that you're working around. That means you're building new features, functionality to work around what's already there, thus adding complexity to something that doesn't have to be as complex. In this PHP example, there's a function called getMessage that prints out the word hello. And then there's another function added called updatedMessage that adds the word world to it. And it seems at the end of this code example that you really care about the updated message. But instead of getting rid of getMessage or refactoring it, that function is being pumped into the other function. And this is overly complex for what it needs to do. Again, this is just a simple example of what complexity obsolete code can add. But the worst is that obsolete code can introduce unknown vulnerabilities into your code base. It can produce options that allow people to execute and take advantage of your code base that you don't want them to do, producing unexpected results. In this PHP example, there's a function called getUserValue that has a code comment that says do not use, that because it's returning post value, which you should never do this in PHP. Now that old function is commented out, the call to it down at the bottom of this example, and the new clean submitted value function is being called instead. However, that old insecure function is still available. And if you leave obsolete code in place for someone to use, eventually it's going to get used and produce unexpected results and potentially vulnerabilities. So when I say delete your code, and this is important for developers to know, what I actually mean is delete your obsolete code. Any of the code that's in your code base that is not needed to deliver that, meet those requirements or deliver that functionality should be deleted. The problem is deleting code is difficult. Now, deleting code is not actually difficult. Anyone here can hit the delete key in your IDE and get rid of your code. You can highlight code and delete it and remove it. You can remove dependencies. That's not the difficult part. So what I actually mean by this is that deleting code with confidence is difficult. As developers, we take pride in the work we do. It takes a lot of creative effort to solve a problem, to write the code, to do so in a way that makes sense. And so getting rid of code and being confident that the code you're going to remove is a difficult thing to do. And just like anything that's difficult for humans, if we can avoid doing what's difficult, we're going to avoid it. So there's a lot of excuses out there that developers use to avoid deleting code. You may say, well, I don't know what will happen if I get rid of this, so let's leave it in place. Or it's been here for so long, this functionality has existed for so long since I've come onto this project, I'm gonna leave it in and just work around it. Or the almighty question of, well, what if we need to put it back? If we delete it and we have to put it back, how are we going to do that? It's going to be harder to recreate it. So maybe we should just comment it out instead. There's many, many, many excuses that developers can use to avoid actually deleting code from the code base. Now, one of the two methods that most developers employ when they're avoiding deleting code but not using it is one, leaving it in place. So here in this JavaScript example, there's a function called calculateTotal that you may notice has two return statements. It used to just have one called returning the total, but when this developer realized they have to add tags to it, they don't want to get rid of the old one, so they just add another return statement. This is overly complex, confusing, and it's avoiding removing that old return statement. Or more popularly is people just comment out whole blocks of code. So in this similar JavaScript example, instead of leaving the old code in place, the old calculateTotal function has been commented out and a new one's been written, just in case the old one has to be restored. Obviously, this avoids deleting code and it's a quick, temporary way to do it, but it's not a long-term solution. It adds more problems than it solves. But if a developer has some solid techniques for how and when to delete obsolete code, you can feel more confident in doing so. The first thing is to use a code linter. All modern IDEs, all modern programming languages have plugins and linters that you can implement to check out what code can be safely removed. Most IDEs will highlight for you when a variable is obsolete and not being called so that you know you can get rid of it. Or they allow you to track how a method is being used and called so you can see the tree and how it's being used. So use a code linter to better understand your code and if it's being utilized or not. Add descriptive code comments. Follow the coding standards for your language and your framework and add comments to your functions, to your methods, your classes, to each line, almost every line of your code, but comments that clearly explain what the code is doing and how it's going to be expected to be used. This will help you when you need to reevaluate and refactor if code can be removed if it's duplicating something that another method is using. Commit early and commit often. Hopefully you're using a code repository such as Git, and if you are, as you're making changes, as you're deleting code, obsolete code, commit those changes. Commit them often, write commit messages that make sense and explain what you've changed so that if you do need to revert it, you can go back and read through your commit history and revert a single commit instead of finding whole blocks of commented out code that you need to uncomment and make sure it still work. And then finally, test. Be that manual testing, smoke testing, or automated regression testing. Make sure you're putting in tests in place or you're performing tests as you're deleting code to make sure you're still getting the expected output. All these things will help you feel confident in deleting obsolete code. And when you do that, the results you're going to see in your code base that doesn't have that obsolete code, when you've deleted obsolete code, one, your code is going to contain only what is needed to solve the problem and nothing more. You're going to have exactly what you need to meet your requirements and nothing that's just sitting there potentially waiting to cause a problem. Your code is then easier to read and maintain, especially if you're writing code comments and it only contains what it needs. It's going to be easier to make those changes because there's not a lot of extra things you have to sort through and a lot of complexities as overly complex things that you don't need to pay attention to. And then changes are easier to find and potentially revert if you're using things such as Git, because you can look through your Git history, see the changes instead of sorting through commented out code. You'll be able to find what was removed, and if you need to put it back, be able to put it back. So, delete your code. Delete your obsolete code. Feel confident that you can do this, and know that when you delete your code, it's going to benefit you, your team, and your code base overall. And it's going to be better in the long run. So if you like this presentation, I hope you go forward and look at your code and think today, like, oh, I can delete this one line, and you do so confidently. If you want to review these slides, they're available at this bit.ly link, bit.ly/GitKon22delete. And I look forward to talking more with you on this subject in the GitKon Discord. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, delete your repos. What? I have questions. And if you have questions, well, you know where to put them. Ooh, he said delete your code, not delete your repos. But if you have questions for Michael's talk, head over to Discord, post a question in that Discord server, and let's start populating more and more conversations on there. Remember, the Discord server is only available for the duration of the conference. So if you're joining us during these 3 days, that is definitely a benefit to being here. Let's see what those, get those juices going. Maybe you have an idea that the speakers would love to talk more about. Okay, next we have the next episode of Between Two Branches. So let's head over to our GitKon correspondent, Bill Huxley, as he talks to one of our engineers about their experience with software development. Take it away, Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Huxley, and welcome back to Between Two Branches. I am with Avi, who is a junior developer, who's going to talk to us about the challenges of growing up in a world with infinite memory and infinite CPU speed, and how tough he has it. Avi, welcome.
It's great to be here.
So, you have never programmed in a world where you need to manage your own memory. Do you worry that you'll never achieve the same heights as more senior developers who have been in the game longer?
Well, I can stand on their shoulders.
So you're a recent graduate from university. What's the most exciting thing you learned there?
Well, we once had to develop our own kernel extension. That was really cool.
Mm-hmm. And was it tough taking on all that student debt just to find out that your whole job is pretty much Googling Stack Overflow?
Is that how you develop software?
Moving on. What's it like only knowing languages that do all the programming for you?
Which do you prefer, Fortran or COBOL?
So, as a new developer, how much time do you say you would waste in a given day waiting for your boss who actually knows things to solve your problems for you? Upper management frequently talks about struggling with COVID fatigue, the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, etc. What is your experience being part of the laziest generation?
Well, What is your experience watching your skills just dwindle into obsolescence? Does bamboo even count as branches?
There's branches up there.
Well, there's like 8 of them.
Well, we can't call it between 8 branches.
Hello, my name is Greg Bulmash, and I'm here to talk to you about content discoverability in GitHub repositories. I'm going to talk a bit about a discoverability journey I went on while I was working at Amazon Alexa. I have to disclaim that I am no longer officially with Alexa, and at the time of developing this presentation, not employed by Amazon. Companies with external developer audiences often use GitHub to deliver code samples. It's well known to developers, they can file issues and pull requests, and you can use a variety of licenses. When I was on the Alexa Skills Kit developer education team, I managed the Alexa Cookbook repository, a huge mono-repository of snippets, samples, guides, and even end-to-end demos. It was dozens of megabytes, hundreds of folders, and even more files. It was hard to navigate and has thankfully been archived/retired. I was able to improve some things early on, but the issues with the repo were really hammered home about a year later when an executive emailed me asking where the Alexa Conversations pizza ordering skill demo went. Here's a search from the top of the Alexa organization in GitHub. Notice how the most prominent message is that there are no matching repositories. It's because the term we searched for isn't part of a repository's name. Only when you look at the small table on the left do you see that there are results. In fact, if we click on the code category, which has 13 results, we find the exact code sample he was looking for. But any of us who have worked on UI or UX know that people aren't likely to even look at that small table. It's not because they're lazy, but because they've been misled. The biggest, boldest letters on the page are telling you it can't be found. There's an old joke about a helicopter pilot who gets lost in the fog. He approaches a skyscraper and can see someone at a window. He grabs a pad and writes, "Where am I?" on it, and shows it to the person in the skyscraper. The person in the skyscraper grabs a pad of paper and writes on it, then holds it to the window. It says, "You're in a helicopter." The problem with some interfaces are that while the information the customer receives is technically correct, it isn't very helpful. So the customers who think your content isn't there aren't bad people. They're not lazy. They're just reacting to a bad experience. And more to the point, you don't often have the opportunity to teach your customers the finer points of searching GitHub. So we've established that GitHub's internal search is not optimal or particularly user-friendly, so let's try Google. Now, if I just try Alexa Pizza Ordering, I get a bunch of third-party results. If I add GitHub to the search term, I finally get an actual Alexa-owned link at the 9th result. But it's the launch blog for Alexa Conversations, and it mentions the pizza ordering reference skill only in terms of its availability as a starter template in Alexa-hosted skills. There's no link to the repo. The only GitHub link in the entire article is a link titled Alexa Conversations GitHub Sample Code in the More Information section, which goes to a different demo skill called Pet Match that recommends dogs. Okay, let's assume I'm not rushing, and I know the exact name, and I build a more complex search phrase, Alexa Conversations Pizza Reference Skill GitHub. The top 4 Google results all go to Alexa-owned repos, but none are the correct one. See the notations under the results? None of them include pizza. It's only the 5th result, not pictured, which goes to an Alexa documentation page for conversations. That page is not the sample, but does have a link to the GitHub sample. But that's a pretty roundabout way to find it. The deeper in your site's folder structure, as determined by the number of forward slashes after the domain name, the less relevant Google considers the document. So let's look at the folder depth of the two URLs. The documentation page URL is 4 folders off the root URL, developer.amazon.com. The GitHub URL is 7 folders off the top. So deep it seems Google has decided it's of such low value it doesn't come up in search results. Let's go back a dozen slides because this is worth pointing out again. When a customer wanted to get this one code sample, if they even knew it was in the cookbook, they had to clone the entire cookbook repo and find it inside the 307 folders or scrape the files from the GitHub website, if they could find them. So what are my 5 tips for better content discoverability on GitHub? Tip 1, some people might window shop your repositories, just looking to see what you have available, but when they need to get stuff done, they'll search. So the next 4 tips are all about repository SEO. They aren't intended to elevate your repo higher than a competitor's repo in search results. They're simply intended to get it to actually show up in search results. An organization is like a username in your GitHub URL. It's 1 level off the top, and your repo name slug is 2 levels off the top, instead of 7 levels in a buried folder name. The cookbook monorepository was in the Alexa organization. Just before I left Alexa, we finally started an Alexa samples organization, reinforcing for both customers and bots that the repositories in this space were samples. We moved all the samples that we plan to keep maintaining into it as a top-level repository, whether they'd been top-level before or deep in the cookbook. Again, that puts the repository name slug 2 folders off the top, not 7. So let's take one of those samples and search Google for it. Alexa audio player. There we go! It's the first result on Google. What if we just go to GitHub's top level and search for it? First and third results. Top is the Node version that's more actively maintained, and third is the Python version. Remember how the pizza ordering demo skill was called the pizza reference skill in its folder name? Not even internal people called it that, except the developer who created the folder name. Audio player is a very common phrase. Pizza reference isn't. That brings up a subpoint of this tip. Using words your customers would use in your repo name helps a lot, but how do you figure those out? You might think you can just grab random people and ask them to try to find it on Google, taking note of what they use as search terms. But remember, if you say, try to Google the pizza reference skill, they will often use the phrase pizza reference skill because you just put it at the tippy top of their memory. Your own terminology becomes self-reinforcing. Whatever you tell them you want to search for, they'll often use the words you use to describe it. It's the power of suggestion and action. Try to think of the top 3 to 4 descriptive words your customers would use, and make that a part of no more than 4 to 6 words in your slug. That will be the repository name in the URL. Pizza ordering Alexa conversations demo skill, for example. Put them in order of importance. Whether Alexa conversations or pizza ordering is the most important phrase would be up to you. A couple of long-proven tips in helping Googlebot understand what your pages are about are that the H1 text is considered more important in determining the keywords for a page than the body text. Bold text is more important than plain text. But if you make everything H1 and bold, it will prove the old adage, if everything's important, then nothing is important. Think about the H1 at the top of the root directory README. Make it meaningful for humans and bots. And do the same with the first line of text below it. A good strategy is to rephrase the repo name as the headline of the README. You reinforce the idea, but with different keywords and or a different order. So while the repo slug name might be Alexa Conversations Pizza Ordering Skill Demo, the headline of the README might be Order Pizza with the Alexa Conversations Demo Skill. Remember how we actually found that pizza ordering skill via Google? Through a link to it on another page. On top of that, Google uses the actual text you link as another factor to help determine the linked page's relevant keywords, which is why click here is always such a horrible phrase to link. Also, the number of backlinks using your preferred text are signals to Google of the page's relevance to those words. So let's say you've got a post on your developer blog announcing a launch or update of the repo. Link every mention of the repo to the repo with an important keyword in the link text. Now, linking every mention is not going to influence the bot that much, but it will also drive more clicks by customers. They shouldn't have to wait until the end of the post or scroll back up to the beginning to find that link. If you have an influencer program like Alexa Champions or AWS Heroes, suggest link texts for them to use in their blogs talking about the repo. Deep link into your repo from the README pointing at important features. Even internal links improve discoverability, both from a browsing and searching perspective. And if you have included a samples directory in, say, an SDK or API client repo, and you believe it's truly better for them to be there than in their own repos, the top README should link to the samples directory. The directory should have a README with descriptions and links to the samples, and each samples directory should have a README with the description again. And this is not just for bots, it's for customers too. How many public restrooms put the hand dryer instructions in the hallway outside and expect you to remember them when you're at the sink? Unless you're keyword spamming, good SEO and good user experience reinforce each other, whether in your web pages or your GitHub repos. So, remember where our journey really started, when someone looking for a specific code demo couldn't find it. As the old biblical paraphrasing goes, don't hide your light under a bushel. And if you're not familiar with what a bushel is, it's 4 pecks. Yes, like in pickled peppers. And for those of you who always wanted to know how many pickled peppers Peter Piper picked, a peck is equal to 8.81 liters in volume. It's amazing what you can find online. Make your code samples on GitHub easier to find and make developers happier. Thanks for listening. I'm Greg Bulmash, Let My People Code on Twitter and GitHub, and I blog regularly at letmypeoplecode.com. And in the words of the philosophers Bill S. Preston and Ted Theodore Logan, be excellent to each other. And party on, dudes! Thank you.
Many thanks to Greg for rounding us out for GitKon 2022 Day 1. If you have questions for Greg, please head over to our Discord server and post those questions. Remember, all of our speakers are available during their sessions and shortly thereafter, and you're always welcome to post questions in the Discord server to continue the conversation. And hey, you can continue the conversation on Twitter. So please make sure to use the @GitKraken tag and use the hashtag GitKon to share any thoughts or ideas that you've learned from any of our speakers or any of our sessions today. And hey, I'm sure the speakers would love to be tagged in those as well. I'm sure they've been dropping their Twitter handles throughout all of their sessions. Let's recap through all the things, all the happenings that have happened in Day 1. Speaking of Twitter, if you wish to participate in our Kraken art contest or giveaway, this is your last chance to download the image that was unlocked today on gitcon.com/watch-live. So if you scroll down on the player, you'll see that one of those images has been unlocked. This is your last chance to download that image because you need that image to enter the contest for today. So use that image and have it somewhere handy in a background when you take a selfie. So take a selfie with that image in the background, and @GitKraken, #GitKon, share some thoughts about the conference. and you will be entered into a contest to win a hoodie with the custom art, the custom design, one of the 3 custom art designs, along with a $100 Amazon gift card. So you can enter every single day and increase our probability that you'll be one of our 3 winners, which will be announced at the end of GitKon. The other thing to note is that today we launched the Git certification, the Foundations of Git certification course. And so that is available to everyone for free, but especially to our GitKon attendees. You may enroll in the course or share it with others that you feel would benefit from learning basics like repo basics, branching, merging and rebasing, interactive rebase, and even the beginnings of tools like work trees and submodules and other useful tools. So go to learn.gitkraken.com to either enroll yourself and go through the course, or share it with someone on your team or someone in your life that you feel would benefit immensely from learning the basics. All right, so that's the end of day 1. Please join us for day 2 here on the Watch Live page. As a quick logistical thing, the recording of day 1 will be available on the Watch Live page, and this player will then update to day 2. So starting tomorrow, you'll see the preview for day 2, and then below it, you'll see a link to our day 1 recording, and we'll rinse and repeat for the other day as well. All right, with that, I've been your host, Jonathan Silva, and we'll see you on day 2 of GitKon 2022.